topic is focused on something pertaining to digital transformation. So whether it be, cloud specific ERP systems that we recommend, or a deep dive into cybersecurity, different concepts around digital transformation. We bring in experts from our team who have been in the industry for years to share insights, share best practices, but we're also creating a platform for you to jump in and ask questions from those experts. You have a clear line to the people who are going to be speaking today to ask any questions about what you're going through with your organization, what your experiences are, or even if you have ideas that complement or, kind of play devil's advocate to our speakers, we'd love to hear from you. So don't be hesitant, jump in, get involved, and we'll talk about organizational change management. Now, today, like I said, it's everything you need to know about OCM. So, it's spring, changes in the air. So what better timing? And for me, honestly, organizational change management is probably one of my favorite topics that we discuss, just because it's so important and the ROI is there if you have a successful OCM strategy. I mean, if you think about it, thousands of companies are implementing the same technologies, right? But what is the main differentiator? It's the people. It's the people on the front line. It's the people who are implementing all across the board. It's the human factor. It's not necessarily the technology. So what are the different ways that you can, deliver change to your team in a successful manner and really drive those results that you're looking for? So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. And we have our global third stage team here that's going to walk us through 3 different sessions. So just a little breakdown of how it's going to work. We're going to have 3 50-minute or so sessions. And in between, we're going to have a 10-minute break. So throughout those sessions, even on the break, jump in with the questions. Like I said, jump in with the comments. We want to hear from you. And we'll make it more of a conversation, if you will. So with that, let's go ahead and kick off our first topic. So Eric is here with me on the stage. This is Eric Kimberling. He's the founder and CEO of Third Stage Consulting. And many of you have probably seen his work thus far, from his videos to the podcast to the various blogs, the white papers, the reports. He is constantly putting out new content and has become a thought leader in all things digital transformation and specifically in organizational change management. Now, his tenure ranges 25 years, not to date you, Eric, but he has I know, I'm sorry, but he has a lot of experience in what we're about to talk about today. And he's going to be talking about, to kick us off, really just an overview of what is organizational change management and why is it important. So with that, Eric, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Parisa, and thanks for everyone joining today. I have to apologize in advance. There's a high likelihood that my video is going to be glitchy today, at least the video of me talking, because I'm on a hotspot due to a technical issue in the office I'm at today while traveling. So hopefully the audio comes through okay. If you have trouble hearing me at any point along the way, maybe just pop it in the chat, and Parisa and the team will keep an eye on that. We have plan Bs and backup plans in place in case I lose audio or video for some reason. But hopefully that won't be a problem. But again, thank you for being here. To talk about is probably my favorite topic to talk about. If anything, I started my career as a change management consultant. So that's really the way I see the world and the way I grew up in the world of consulting, with things through a people and organizational change lens. And even after 20 to 25 years of doing this and getting involved in other parts of digital transformation, business transformation, I always seem to come back to change management as sort of the core of key success factor. And that's the other point. The other reason why I love talking about this is because I think it's a completely underrated discipline. And I think it's the most critical part of any sort of transformation. A lot of people won't say that or admit that if you're outside the world of change management, but that has been my finding or my experience, is that that is the most important thing. The other part of this is that I want to chat about here today is I actually have a deck I'm going to share with you, and that will hopefully give us some good discussion points here. So bear with me while I try to make sure I can pull up my screen. It looks like I can. All right, so if you do not see my screen, please chat, or if you could just chat and let me know if you do see it. That's even more helpful, just to make sure that it's coming through okay. So what I want to talk about today is really change management of strategy versus reality. and how we connect the dots between these two aspects of change management, between the strategy of it and the reality of it. And what we're going to do today, by the way, is I'm going to spend the first block of this workshop today, the first 50 minutes or so, talking about an overview of change management. The second hour, we're going to get into a Q&A discussion with three other team members from our global team, as well as myself. And then in the third segment, which I'm really excited for, we're going to have two of our change management consultants talk through more detail around methodology. So I'm going to give sort of a flyover of change management. We'll get into some Q&A and a panel discussion next. And then during the third hour of today's workshop, in about 2 hours from now, a little less than 2 hours from now, we'll dive into the some of the methodology in more detail around how to execute on a change management plan. But in the meantime, just to give you a quick introduction, I've been in the space, as Parisa said, for over 20 years. I started off as a change consultant at Pricewaterhouse, doing big, massive, bloated SAP implementation. So for better or for worse, that's where I learned about change management and the benefits of doing change management, as well as some of the challenges of what happens when you don't address change management well. So I'm excited for today's discussion again. So just real quickly, I guess to start, I would love to hear some comments here about your experience with current and past transformations. And just as a context setting here, we're streaming in a few different locations here today. We're streaming on LinkedIn, which I have open right next to me. So if you see me keep looking over to my right, it's because my right, your left. It's because I'm watching the chat on LinkedIn. We're on Crowdcast, obviously, which is right in front of me. And we're also streaming live on YouTube. So, and I'm watching all three of those platforms, as is the rest of our team. So if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to see your comments in whichever stream you're watching. And the first question I have is, if you could summarize your experience with current and past transformations, maybe just chat it in the box here. And I know it's probably difficult to summarize in a single, text chat type of thing. But if you have any sort of experience, like change has been difficult, or we didn't address change, or you wish people would think more about management within your organization, or you don't know what change management is, I would just love to get a real quick summary, sort of headline view of what your experience with change has been. Or if you're a consultant, maybe talk about that, you're a consultant that does change, or whatever the case may be. I'd love to just hear some comments around what your backgrounds are and get some context for who you are. So let's start there, and I'd love to, and I'll read through some of these chats as we're going through the discussion here, as they start to come in. So to start, I'm going to come back to that question here in a second. I'll go through some of the responses we get, but just to summarize what change management is in the meantime. Essentially, what change management is, in its simplest term, is anything that prepares people for the transformation that you're about to go through, whether it's a digital transformation, a business transformation, whatever the transformation may be. And it's also anything that drives transformational performance. So I think the key operative terms here are people and performance. So, and I think that's a very important differentiator or thing to comment on or to hone in on here, is that change management is not just a nice to have or a something you do to make people feel good, although those are secondary benefits for sure. But really, this is about the transformational performance. And if if we're doing change management in a way that doesn't directly impact performance, then we're probably doing it wrong. We're probably focused on the wrong things. So if we had to summarize for someone, why is change management important? Yes, it's about people. And I think most people genuinely understand that. But I think where a lot of people, especially executives and project leaders and that sort of thing, and I don't want to stereotype, even though I am stereotyping, I don't need to generalize too much. But a lot of times executives and project leaders don't fully understand what change management is, and they think it's just about people. But the key differentiator in the way we view it is it's also about performance. If you address the people side in the way that changes behavior and translates into operational results, you're going to get performance. So that's the big selling point, I would say, for change management. I think often gets lost in the translation or lost in the mix along the way. So while before we dive into the next segment where we unpack this comment or this whole what is organizational change concept a little bit more, I want to read some of the comments that I'm seeing so far on the different live streams we have going here. Karen over on Crowdcast says that SIs often do not embrace and value change management over installation. That's a hugely important point that I could not agree more with. System integrators are there to help you design, build, and deploy technology. They may do what they call change management, which is typically training, maybe some light communication, but they don't really do change management as a broad generalization. They're there to help figure out how to get people to use a system. And that's very different than organizational change management for broader transformation. And for most organizations that are deploying technology, they typically aren't deploying technology just for technology's sake. Typically, they're also trying to drive some broader transformation. So great comment there. And I agree with your point there. Another comment here on Crowdcast from Liam Boyd is, we don't have time for process change, creation, documentation. We need the technology implemented now to give us the space and resource for that change. And he put that all in quotes, by the way. So I think that's something, what he's suggesting is that's something he hears from others within his organization. So, and that's a great point too. The focus of his comment is on process change, creation, documentation. And that's ultimately what we're trying to change. Typically, we're trying to change business processes that people execute. So if we don't have time to clearly define what the business processes are, we're probably not going to do a very good job of change management, no matter how good we are at change management. So that operational business process piece is definitely a prerequisite to addressing change management well. There's a bunch of comments here over on LinkedIn, so I'm going to get to a few of these here. And I apologize, I probably won't be able to get to all of them. And I appreciate all of these great comments. I didn't expect this many people to join all at the start with all this great feedback. So this is a good problem to have. Comment here is most challenging for me, and this is from Vadim over on LinkedIn. He says, the most challenging for me is to save a mature generation and team, and implement rapid changes. They simply don't accept it all. So it sounds like it's a 50 to 60-year-old company. So the most challenging for me is it's a mature organization with this team, and how do you implement rapid changes when you've been around for 50 or 60 years as an organization? They simply don't accept it at all. So that's a very real headwind that we see, especially with older, more established organizations. That's definitely a big challenge. A lot of times, startups and younger companies have an easier time changing simply because they're moving so fast and they don't have the history and the organizational baggage, for lack of a better word, that they have to overcome. They can start with more of a clean slate. So if you're within an organization that is more established, more mature, that's all good stuff. But when it comes to changing quickly, that makes it more difficult. So we have a couple people here. They're saying they're brand new in change management. They're here to learn about change management. Another comment here is from Brett Ganaway over on LinkedIn. He says, in my opinion, the most difficult part is turning non-techie people into people that embrace cloud technology. And that's a really good point with cloud technology. You're sort of shifting from more of an IT behind the scenes type of function to more of now the business users are the ones driving a lot of the traditionally technical aspects of a deployment, and certainly the maintenance and the continued improvement of that software. So that's a great point as well. And then I'll just pick another comment here over here on LinkedIn. This is from Revan Naidu over on LinkedIn. He says, the people side is my favorite and most challenging platform, working to bring about change within people, but expanding their heart and alignment of personal and business values. And that's very well put. And I think, alignment and values are two big parts of management that are important, and we want to make sure we address, and we'll talk about that here as we go through the presentation. So thank you for those comments, really appreciate. And then I'll get one more comment just over on YouTube, just to make sure I'm hitting all the live streams here. One of the comments over on YouTube is that Amara Dumbia said that underestimating people resistance to change is one of the biggest challenges that he faces. So thank you for all those comments. So very well stated, and it's a good context of where you all are with your transformation journeys right now.
Yeah, and hey, Eric, it's Kyler here. Just with a logistical note, if you are on a live stream, go ahead and pop questions in the comment section, and we'll go ahead and put them in the question section on Crowdcast, so we'll be able to address them throughout the event. So don't worry about getting missed. Great stuff. Thanks so much. Yeah,
thanks, Kyler. And we'll all keep an eye on all these live streams just to make sure we're involving everyone, regardless of where you're watching here today. So the next comment or thread I wanted to talk about is how change is difficult and personal. One of the most common things that we hear from clients, and it seems like, I don't know, if I don't have any science or data to back this other than qualitative observations, but in our experience in recent years, it seems like this is becoming more of a phenomenon that I don't fully understand why this is, but it seems as though more and more organizations are shifting into this flawed mentality that our people are ready for change. They don't like the way things are today. They're tired of the old system. They really want a cloud solution, something user-friendly. And so therefore change management surely can't be difficult. And that's a really big blind spot or pitfall that a lot of organizations fall into. And it's hard to communicate and to educate organizations of how flawed that assumption is without letting them just step into the landmine or step into the pitfall. And the reason for that is that because change is difficult and personal, that is a big challenge. And what we often see, in fact, I was today, I'm traveling at a client here in the United States, and it reminded me of this presentation I was about to give, because we were dealing with someone who's very high up in the organization at this particular client, who has been around at the organization for over 20 years and has been very successful at this organization. But the way that she's been successful has been by being a hero. I mean, she's holding a lot of that organization together just based on pure heroics and brute force and will. You know, she's doing a lot of work that she really shouldn't have to do, but she's doing it because there's limitations to processes and people. And so, or processes and technology, I should say. So on the surface, you may think, well, great, it's great to have someone like that. Surely she's going to want the change because her job is so difficult and it doesn't need to be that difficult. But she takes a lot of pride in the fact that she is holding that together. So that's something that's worth noting. We see this a lot, where sometimes your best people, the people that are most instrumental and crucial to your operations today, are going to be the ones that are going to have the most trouble with change in the future. And the reason for that is because people are comfortable with what they know. Anytime something's forced on them, they start to question things. And people change or don't change or resist change for their own reasons, either because they understand and believe in the new direction or because they don't, in which case they'll resist it, or they follow orders from leaders if it's the type of subordinate or employee who will just follow what their leaders tell them. In that case, then change management might be a little bit more difficult. But most organizations don't have people that are just blindly following. They'll ask questions. They'll want to understand before fully embracing and buying into the change. They trust peers who are on board. They're excited to learn something new. That could be a good incentive for people to want to learn. Changing enables them to keep their jobs, and then finally, in some cases, people are rewarded for changing and supporting the change. So we have to think about how do we recognize how different people tick, and how can we motivate them and incent them in different ways. And in every person, every work group, every business unit, every department within your organization is going to have different nuances that you have to be able to navigate. So there's no cookie cutter, one size fits all approach. You have to really sort of do more of a surgical focus on what is going to drive people and what's going to make them tick. So another concept to build on that is that there's a number of common people challenges. And when we think about change, oftentimes, or when we think about resistance to change, I should say, we oftentimes think about the person that just flat out refuses to change. And they're not on board. They're very vocal about the fact that they don't like this project, or they don't think that we should be going through this transformation. Those people are pretty rare in most organizations that we work with. You don't see a lot of that. You don't see a lot of people that are just flat out on the surface resisting change. Most people, for the most part, I think deep down want to change, or they see the vision for the organization and they want to support the direction of the organization. And I think, in general, people mean well. And the challenge is not so much that intentional resistance or even sabotage of a project, although, to be honest, at least with sabotaging and that intentional resistance, it's very clear where the resistance is. It's very easy to spot and detect. So that's the good news about it, but it's very rare. The bigger problem is almost like a iceberg. Tip of the iceberg, yes, those are those very few people who flat out resist the change. But underneath the iceberg, that's where resistance really happens. And that's typically coming from places that are unintentional. So people typically don't resist change because they intentionally want to resist change, or they intentionally want to sabotage a transformation, or they don't want to support the organization. Typically, it comes from unintentional places of misunderstanding. So you have things like, there's a perceived loss, for example. So In the client example I gave you just a second ago with the female executive that had been with the company for a long time and is really holding together a lot of that organization, she inevitably is going to have a fear of loss. And she has not articulated this to us, but we've seen it enough times to know that the change and the change management is going to be a threat to her, because suddenly she may question her value. She's not going to know what to do with her time or where her value is going to come from if it's not fixing problems or figuring out ways to tie together this hodgepodge of systems they have now. So that's the type of thing we have to think about. It's not that she's going to intentionally sabotage the project, but she will be scared in some way, on some degree. So we have to figure out, how do we ensure that we overcome that unintentional resistance? And then there's also misunderstanding. A lot of times people just don't understand what the purpose of the transformation is. A lot of times the project team and the executive team don't understand either, which makes it even more confusing for the organization. So we have to have clarity and understanding, starting at the top, starting with executives, and then working our way down to the project team. And then finally, misalignment is a common reason that people will unintentionally resist change. So whenever an organization is misaligned and it is not rowing in the same direction, again, it's not that people are trying to sabotage a project or sabotage the organization, but the problem is they're not aligned. And when they're not aligned, they can't fully embrace and support a change because they're not going in the same direction. So we have to ensure that we have alignment throughout the organization, in addition to overcoming misunderstanding and overcoming other sources of unintentional resistance. So we have to look beyond the obvious change management issues and look below the tip of the iceberg to fully understand where those challenges may come from. And you can see on the right side of the screen here, there are a lot of symptoms to some of these people challenges. People will oftentimes refuse to accept the changes. They'll continue to work around the system or work around the future state operating model and revert back to the way things were. They'll oftentimes manifest resistance to change in the form of customization requests if it's a technology deployment. So in other words, rather than adapting to the new software, they will try to find a way to change the software to fit the way things are today. And that ends up leading to paving the cow paths, or just simply doing things the way you always have, but now with new technology. And then finally, another symptom that oftentimes will get executives' attention more than any of the other things we've talked about so far is the operational disruption it causes when you don't adequately address some of these common people challenges. And you could argue there's your business case for change right there. If you want to avoid disruption, and when I talk about disruption, it's not just, hey, things are a little more difficult, they're a little bit harder to get used to. It's more material operational disruptions, like we can't ship product or we can't close the books. Those are two common examples of material operational disruption that's very common, especially when you don't address the people side of change. So again, any questions along the way, I'd love to hear your comments here. In fact, I might just pull a couple here because I see them streaming in as I'm speaking here. One of the comments here from Vanjie over on Crowdcast is a low adoption undermines the expected benefits to be realized from the transformation initiative. And that's absolutely true. So in addition to thinking about the operational disruption that I just mentioned, that's just basic, let's avoid a disaster type thinking. Let's avoid operational disruption. That alone can build a business case for change. But if we want to think even more strategically and look beyond the concept of just avoiding chaos or avoiding a disaster, we then need to think about, well, how do we maximize our ROI on this? How do we optimize our operations going forward and get a true ROI on this project? And if we're going to do that, we need high adoption in order to realize those business benefits. So that's a great point. Another question is from, he says, can we say business analysis is part of change management? And I would say yes. I tend to view, the way I view change management, and I tend to like to hire people on our team that think the same way. And that's part of why we have the team we have here today speaking to support this workshop later today, is that they don't think about OCM typically in isolation or in its own silo. They think about change management being integrated into the operational improvements and the overall project management, even the technology design and rollout. So all those things are important. It should be integrated. And the last thing we want to do is treat OCM as sort of a standalone, siloed work stream, because, well, first of all, what's likely to happen is change management will end up getting cut at some point when people realize there's so much work to do and we're going to go over budget and this is going to take more time and effort than we thought. change management becomes even more of a risk of getting cut when that happens. So if we can embed change management throughout the project and integrate it, that makes things a lot better. A couple other comments here I'll get to, and keep the comments coming. These are great discussion points. Here's a question that I'll address here that just came in over on LinkedIn, and that is, why are people resistant to change? Commonly due to leadership being distant from the ground level. Change comes across by handholding and leading on the front line. Change comes from resonance from those who lead the change. So this is a really good point. Change management, even though at times when we talk about alignment, we talk about a change management, or we talk about a top-down sort of approach to change management when we talk about alignment, because that does start at the executive level. You need buy-in at the executive level, and then that ultimately needs to work its way down the organization. But beyond that, when you start talking about the real change, in the battlefield or in the trenches of change, you do have to get down on the front lines and fully understand how the operations are working today and how they're going to operate in the future. One of the things that I don't like about change management, and one of the things that has frustrated me as a change management consultant over the years, has been the sort of thinking that, one, we operate in a silo, which I already mentioned, but the second thing that frustrates me is when change management becomes a super theoretical academic sort of exercise, because none of that stuff really matters if we can't get people in the trenches to actually change their behavior. And we're not going to do it by doing sort of the flyover change management where we send out some emails, put together a real nice communications plan, and fire off, project newsletters and whatnot, or maybe even have a couple messages come in from the CEO. That's all great stuff. That's good, what I call the flyover, the air game of change management. But for change management to really succeed, you've got to get down on the ground, and you've got to have a really good ground game to support that air cover you're getting at the, sort of the top down level. So that's even another reason why that integration to operations and technology is so important. And just to give you a real quick data point or experience point with my background, when I first started at Price Waterhouse, forced me to go get certified in SAP, and I did not want to get certified. The last thing I wanted to do was learn how technology works, and the word ERP just did not appeal to me at all, which is strange saying today because I built a whole career on just focusing on ERP digital transformation. But at that time, being young and naive in my early to mid 20s, I did not want to do ERP or anything technology related. I was a change consultant. I was all about strategy and stuff like that. But what I've learned over the years is that you have to have a good understanding to be a good change consultant. You have to have a good understanding of operations and how supply chains work, how technology works. You can't be an expert in everything, but you need to be able to speak the language, and you need to be able to help guide people through the change by speaking their language. They don't speak the language of change, they speak their language, and you have to adapt to them. So I think that's a key part of being a good change practitioner, whether you're internal or whether you're a consultant. I think that's equally important. So great point there around why people resist change and how the executive and the frontline support is so important. Okay, great questions. I'm going to make sure we leave time at the end here to get to some of these, because they keep coming in on all the platforms here. So just some common change management myths that are worth noting, or worth debunking, I should say, is that change management equals training and communications. That's probably the most common thing we hear, especially from system integrators and software vendors, or anyone that just doesn't really understand change management. If they think of change management and they're thinking training and communications, that's because they're thinking about it from a technology first perspective. How do I get people to adapt to new technology? And training, communications, and technology adoption, those are all important parts of change management. That is a small part of change management. There's a lot more to it well beyond that. So, and we're going to get to what that means and how broad that is, both at a high level in this conversation, but certainly in the third segment in today's workshop as well. The other common myth is that new technology equals transformation, or in other words, technology will drive the change for us. And technology really isn't going to do anything for our organization, to be honest. I mean, certainly it provides a few enablers here and there. It provides the possibility of being able to be more efficient and to have better visibility and to be more effective and provide better customer experience, better employee experience, all that stuff. Yes, technology can enable that. But if all you do is deploy technology, and even if you get people to use the technology that was built to be used, that isn't going to drive the technology, or that is not going to drive the transformation, I should say. Instead, we need to focus on the people side and also the operational side and some other areas, but the people side of it is really, in my opinion, the heart of it all. It really enabling that transformation and connecting the dots between the possibilities of technology, the business processes that they enable, and ultimately it's the people that sort of lights the fuse or lights the spark that makes it possible. And then the third common myth is that consultants will manage the actual change. And as much as I'd love to say that if you just hire all of us here on the workshop and others on the third stage team, we will manage this change for you and everything's going to be great, that's simply not true. We will help you. We'll guide you. We'll provide a framework. We'll guide you through the process. We'll even behind the scenes do a lot of the heavy lifting, but ultimately you or the organization going through the transformation has to be the face of change. They have to be the ones to execute, to be in the front lines. You can't outsource change management to a bunch of consultants and assume that they're going to handle it for you. You need to be heavily involved in it as well, and quite frankly, get your hands dirty in the change process. So watch out for those three common myths. I'd be curious to hear in the chat if any of these resonate with you, if you're seeing any of these three myths in either a transformation you're involved with now or perhaps have been in the past. So just a few other comments here around some of the change management guide principles. First is you want to involve all employees and all people on your team to create organizational ownership. I need to update this slide, by the way, because I despise the word personnel. It sounds very dated to me, or it sounds like something from the 70s or 80s. But think of it as team members. Everyone on your team needs to be involved in creating that organizational. As I mentioned before, you want to drive change from the top down and the bottom up. So it gets back to the point that Riven, I apologize for whichever way I've mispronounced your name, talked about how you want to start, you want to get down in the trenches or work at the online level as well as at the executive level. Gets back to that point there too. You want to customize change plan. There's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all answer. I think one of the shortcomings of some change consultants and change practitioners is that they go learn a tool set, whether it's ProSci certification or any sort of change management framework, and they try to apply that universally across different situations. And what you have to do is think of it as a tool set. You've got a toolbox and you've got to pull out the right change management tools and apply them with differing amounts of focus and discipline based on what the lay of the land is and what it is you're trying to accomplish. So that's the common challenge that you want to make sure you watch for is you want to treat change management as a custom sort of approach that can certainly use proven tactics, but not all tactics are created equally in different situations. You want to measure effectiveness throughout for real-time adjustments. And the more you can be quantitative and measure things, the better. So we oftentimes with our clients will do a series of organizational assessments throughout a transformation to gauge how the needle's moving and also gauge and identify those organizational issues that are percolating and starting to pop up that we didn't anticipate. And as much as I like to say that if you implement a solid change strategy and plan up front, you're going to address everything and everything's going to be predictable from a change perspective. This is probably the most unpredictable part of change management is the people side, because we're dealing with humans and because we can't predict what humans do or won't do. So we need to make sure that we're measuring organizational readiness throughout and that we're adjusting our change strategy and plan as we go. And then we want to accentuate change related data specific to those that are affected. So that's why doing change impact analyses, for example, is so important, which we'll get to that later in the workshop. And identifying how specific work groups, departments, and individuals within an organization are going to be affected differently, and speaking that language and tailoring the change to that reality that they're dealing with. Driving buy-in through proper documentation of need and benefits. New environments change how things get done, which requires new skills. And then finally, always keeping people in the loop with what is happening and why. And I think where a lot of people do is they sort of jump down to number 8 on this guiding principle list. They think of change management as, hey, we're just going to keep people in the loop. We'll send out some newsletters, some emails. We'll have our CEO, pop a slide or two into his or her all employee presentation, and we'll keep people in the loop. And that's our change management plan. And by the way, we'll help them, with training when we get to that point. So back to that slide about what training or what change management is not. Because it's not just training and communications, it's all these other things too. So we can't forget steps 1 through 7 along the way as well. So I want to get into at a high level into the change management tool set, but real quickly, I want to pull a couple other questions because there's so many cool questions coming in here that I enjoy hearing. So another question here, I noticed Parisa popped in a YouTube video that will be a good supplementary or a good supplement to this discussion. Liz Way on Crowdcast says, I like the distinction between intentional and unintentional resistance, which requires different and similar solutions. Thank you, appreciate that. Liam Boyd over on Crowdcast asks, have you ever yourself been caught in one of these challenging mindsets? If so, did you realize it at the time or was it in hindsight? And I would say, and I think Liam's referring to the slide that I talked about the three common myths. And I'd say all three of those are ones that I was guilty of early in my career. And that's in some ways, or in some teams I worked on as a change consultant, that's the approach we took, were sort of those misguided myths. And so, we ended up focusing a lot on training. We focused a lot on communications. We treated it as simply a top-down sort of as far into the front lines and identifying change impacts and translating our messaging to those people. And quite frankly, some of those early mistakes or some of those early opportunities for improvement in my career are what inform how we view change management now at third stage. And it has certainly informed my personal philosophy about change management over the years as well. And even, the partner that made me get the SAP training was also informative. I also had a mentor that encouraged me to go get Lean Six Sigma certified as a change consultant, which I did. And that was super helpful. And I highly value change consultants that can speak that language as well. So I guess I'd say, yes, I've fallen prey or fallen victim to all three of those mindsets, especially earlier in my career. And then another comment here over on LinkedIn from Maxime, or it's either Maxime. I apologize again for the mispronunciation. I'd say one of the myths is that transformation is not always one big thing. It can be the result of many small optimizations, which can also make it easier to get adopted. And that's very well put. It doesn't necessarily need to be this big, massive change that happens all at once. In fact, if you can use the change management program to pull forward some of those changes so that you're doing more of an incremental, steady drip of change into the organization, that's typically going to be more effective for a lot of organizations, primarily because it's so hard to take in change all at once. And that's just a lot to absorb when you spring it all on people in a training session, for example. And that's a dynamic we see very commonly when people have not invested in change management, is you get to end user training and everything seems to be going great, but then people start to freak out when you get to end user training, 30 or 60 days before go live. And that's a problem because you don't want people freaking out right as you're getting ready to go live. You want them freaking out a year before you go live or whenever it is. So the more you can start to clearly define those changes up front and then start to introduce changes to the organization as you can, you don't need to wait and plan for this big, massive go live event. You can start changing operating procedures. You can start changing behavior. You can start changing workflows. Even though the technology might further enable it and make it easier to deploy those changes, you can at least start getting the mindsets in place. As an example, we had a client, this was a long time, probably 15 years ago. So the technology we were working with is dated at this point, but the approach is very relevant today. And that is we were working with a company that was on an old mainframe system and they were moving over to SAP. And rather than just wait until we were going to go live with SAP, 2 years out or whatever it was, we decided that there was a lot of these process changes that are just simple procedure type stuff that we can start rolling out now. And yes, they're going to have to use Lotus Notes or spreadsheets or emails or whatever to manage. It's not ideal, but we're at least getting people in the mode of thinking about, for example, how to approve a purchase order. We're going to put a new process in place for purchase order requisitions and approvals. Let's go ahead and put that in place now, even before the new system's rolled out. We can do that via email or, on paper if we had to. But at least we're getting people in the mindset of getting approval and going through the proper channels. And then when the technology comes into place, it's not that big of a change. Now we're just learning how to do it, the same process in the technology. So anything we can do to move that forward is very, very good. So I appreciate those comments. That's very helpful. And I'll keep coming back to these lists on all the streams here. And then one other question that's just an easy one, so I'll knock it out over on YouTube. Irfan asks, how can we get this presentation? Just email us, or I'll ask Parisa or Kyler to put in the chat over on YouTube and all the live streams here of where to get the presentation, but you can email us and we'll get you a copy of this and presentations as well. Be happy to share it with you. All right, so we'll go back to the deck here. So change management tool set. There's a number of things that go into place, and this is an example that we use for some clients, and some clients, it's a slightly different tool set. And actually, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want when Julie and Teresa, who you'll meet here later in a little bit, they're going to go into methodology in a bit more detail. So I'm not going to talk a lot about this here, but what I will say at a high level is that you'll see the obvious stuff here on the slide, like the communications. You certainly have training as part of your change strategy, but you'll see some other things on here that maybe you hadn't thought about yet, like leadership alignment. Leadership alignment is not just, hey, the leadership team approved the project and they're signing the checks. Okay, that's great, but that's just a minimum ante to be able to do the transformation. Now you need them to really be aligned, and that is where a lot of companies get stuck, because they have different visions for what this project means or what this transformation means to the future of the organization. Or even more fundamentally, a lot of times executives are not aligned on what they want to be when they grow up. And if they don't know what they want to be when they grow up, it's nearly impossible for them to know how this transformation should look and how it's going to support the future state of the organization. They might have some high-level goals and strategies in mind, like, realize 20% growth year over year, or enter these new markets, or integrate our new acquisition into our core operations. And those are all great starting points, but we need to go a level deeper in defining alignment and what we want to be when we grow up. And we've had, I have a whole presentation just on strategic alignment that I highly encourage you to check out. I think it's on my YouTube channel, but Kyler or Parisa, if you happen to know where that is, maybe you could direct people to it. I unfortunately don't know where it is exactly, but on my YouTube channel, if you just look up alignment, you'll probably find it there. And if not, we can send you a link. So some of the objectives, though, that we want to accomplish as well, and I'm not going to go through all of these, don't worry, that would take forever, but I'll let you read through these here as we're talking. But generally, the objectives of what we want to accomplish and the tools we use cover the whole gamut, the whole spectrum of change, everything from that high-level alignment to the training communications, business process improvements, deploying organizational changes, which, by the way, that's another key part of change management that people often overlook, is defining what the organization is going to look like. Forget about processes and technologies and user enablement. Now let's talk about, just in general, what is the organization going to look like? Are there different reporting relationships? Are roles and responsibilities going to change, which in most cases they do change. It's just a matter of how clearly you define them or not. So we want to make sure we clearly define the organization in its future state just as clearly as we define the technology future state. We oftentimes spend so much time, way too much time investing just in the technology and getting that to work and clearly defining the way the technology is going to work, but we don't spend nearly enough time defining how our processes is going to work, and even more importantly, how our organization is going to look and how roles and responsibilities and jobs are going to look in the future. And if we treat that as an afterthought or something we'll just figure out later, it's going to be pure chaos at the time of your transformation. So that's another area to look at it. Optimizing business benefits and post-implementation results. Those last two boxes in the bottom right, I think those are really important and worth noting. Again, back to that mindset of not treating change management as just a pure people for people's sake perspective, or treating it as a nice to have or a feel good type of work stream. It should actually deliver tangible business benefits, and all of our change efforts should be focused on how do we improve performance, improve people, but in a way that doesn't just make us feel good, but actually delivers business results. And that sounds like a subtle shift, but it's a very important, very significant shift in mindset compared to many change programs. And I mentioned before that one of the things that we do is a organizational change readiness assessment. And generally we'll do these sorts of assessments early before a transformation ever begins, but then we'll also do it throughout the transformation to see how the needle's moving and to also identify additional change risks, which inevitably there are going to be change risks and change problems that we hadn't anticipated. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember this. I know Parisa's not. She's already made it clear that I'm old compared to her, but just kidding. But if any of you remember the whack-a-mole game, I think it might still be around, where you have the big foam hammer and you have to hit the moles, and a new one pops up everywhere. Change management kind of reminds me of whack-a-mole, because you think you've whacked all the moles and then more of them pop up and you didn't see it coming. You thought something might happen, but you didn't know when or where or how many of them are going to pop up. So that's sort of how you have to think about change management. And these change assessments are critical to identifying and anticipating where those whack-a-moles are going to pop up organizationally. And the other reason these assessments are so important is because we're getting below the surface, underneath the tip of the iceberg, to get to the root cause of change and identifying what the problems are and what we need to do to fix it. Again, we're not waiting. We're not just simply asking people, are you ready for change? Do you want to change? Do you support the change? If you ask those questions, you're always going to get yes, yes, yes. And of course, everything's fine. Let's move on. But what we're trying to understand is, what are those things that we know from experience are going to cause resistance later on, unintentionally, potentially. And for example, when we deal with clients that have a very siloed organization where they just don't communicate well across departments, that's a common problem. And they've done fine with it. They do okay as an organization with it. It's not ideal, but it works. But when you go to change, and when you start to think about how we're going to drive transformation, we know that's going to create a problem, because now all of a sudden you're asking people, if we're implementing enterprise-wide technology or enterprise-wide end-to-end processes, now all of a sudden you're asking people to think outside their box of their reality, of their silo. And that's a big shift for people. And that's going to create resistance, not because they don't want to do it, but just because they don't understand it, and it's scary and it's different. So if we know that about an organization, we can anticipate that there'll probably be some change resistance that is the result of the fact that it's a siloed organization that doesn't communicate well across departments. And so that's why it's so important for us to understand as consultants the lay of the land and the culture of the organization, the good, the bad, the ugly, so that we can anticipate where those challenges might be and start to craft a change strategy and plan that's focused on those specific challenges. So those organizational change assessments, which by the way are a combination of anonymous quantitative surveys to employees, as well as qualitative focus groups with subsets or focus groups of smaller groups of employees, we combine that data to get an assessment or a snapshot of where the organization is, and we can compare that over time. Communication plan. I'm gonna save some of these slides here because I don't want to steal the thunder of Julia and Teresa later today, but hopefully this gives you a flavor of some of the things to be thinking about, and then we'll dive into a little bit more detail later on. But communications, organizational design is a critical part of this. As I mentioned before, defining what the organization is going to look like. This is especially true if you're a global organization, for example, that's moving to a shared services model. You want to centralize accounting and want to move to a common business process operating model. Organizational is important, but it's really important if you're in that situation where you're a global organization and or you're moving to some significant organizational changes, or you want to move to some significant organizational changes that, again, go well beyond technology. We're not talking about how the software works. We're talking about fundamental changes to the way the business operates. Benefits realization, the quantitative aspect of how do we get people to achieve the benefits that we outlined in the business case, hopefully early in the project. And if we haven't done a business case, I, in some ways, put that on the change team to say, well, we need to build the business case, even if it's already been approved and executives are telling you, hey, we don't need a business case. We just have to replace our old technology because the vendor told us we had to, by the way. So we have no choice. We're going to go through this transformation, whether we like it or not. That's a terrible excuse. I mean, it's a good excuse in ways, but it's a terrible excuse if that's your only reason for wanting to do it. You want to make sure you have a clear vision for what sorts of business benefits you expect to get out of it. And then I can simplify this section. When change management occurs during a transformation, I don't need to spend a lot of time on that. I'd be curious to see what you all think of when you think change should happen. But to simplify, I won't even make you read the slide. I'll tell you it should happen now. If you're in the midst of a transformation and you haven't started it yet, even if you're just planning for a transformation, you haven't started it early enough. And that's the unfortunate part of change management, is you never have quite enough time to do what you need to do from a change perspective. And you think about the organizational design, the cultural shifts, the behavioral shifts, all the things you're trying to change, especially if you're an organization like one of the viewers on LinkedIn mentioned, the 50 to 60-year-old organization. The longer you've been around, the longer it's going to take your people to change, whether they tell you otherwise or not. It's just going to take longer. So change management is on the critical path for transformation, and how well we handle change will directly impact how well the transformation goes. And I've yet to meet a client that wishes they would have waited a little longer to start change management, or wishes they would have invested a little bit less in change management. They spent too much time and money on change management. I've yet to meet that person or that client, even when they hire us. If we start on day one, when they're first talking about transformation, it's still not quite enough time. It's definitely better than doing nothing, and you're definitely moving the needle, but there's always opportunity to further move that needle and to further improve the organizational piece of it. So this slide here is really just where we typically would start change management for most clients when we're in that digital strategy phase of kind of laying out the strategy and roadmap, helping evaluate and select technologies, their service offering that we provide our clients in addition to change management. At the time we're defining the solution, the architecture, the business intelligence, and what we hope to get out of any sort of transformation, that's when we typically would start organizational change management as well. And also, when we get into implementation readiness, after we've selected technology, we know what technology we're deploying, we have a plan at a high level. Now we put together a more detailed implementation readiness plan to help us get ready for the deployment, get the people ready, the operations ready, get a clear business and organizational blueprint for what we want to be and how this transformation is going to unfold, so that by the time the system integrator gets involved and the vendor gets involved, we have a very clear mission or narrative that we're gonna manage to. And then one other thing I'll note is when we talk about business process management, process improvement, change management should really be embedded within this. And also your business process improvement efforts should feed into your change strategy and plan. So back to the question, I think it was on LinkedIn, someone made the comment about how, about business analysis and business process improvement and how that's a prerequisite for change management. I totally agree. If you don't do that business process piece of it well, it becomes very difficult to do change management, and you end up starting off your change management initiative on shaky ground. So we have some change case studies that I don't have time to get to, and I didn't think we would, but it's here for your reference. If you'd like these slides, we can email them to you upon request. So just Kyler or Lisa already will drop an email address in the chat boxes here in the various live streams. But in the meantime, I want to get to a few questions, and then maybe I'll spend just 5 minutes on this. We'll take a quick break, and we'll come back and do the more formal Q&A discussion. Any questions we don't get to here right now, we'll obviously keep the stream going. The streams are going to be going for a couple more hours, and we can refer back to these, especially in the Q&A panel discussion that we're going to have here right after this segment and a quick break. But let me pick a couple questions just to close it out here, and before we shift to more of a formalized panel discussion, if you will, along with Q&A from all of you. One of the comments over on LinkedIn is one problem can be staff movement, hiring and firing culture, or talent change. That's a good point. If you have to look at the culture of the organization and the challenges of either attrition, if you have a lot of turnover, or if you're growing quickly and you're hiring a lot of new people, or if you're an established organization, a mature organization with highly tenured people. Those are very different scenarios that require different approaches to change management. So I agree that you have to look at the talent and the stability of the talent, the maturity of the talent, the how long they've been around, all that good stuff. And then let me just pick off one other question, and then we'll save some of these for later as well. Here's a good question from Leesways. Do you adapt, and this is on Crowdcast, do you adapt your change management approach independent on a project? If so, what determines consistency in your approach? So that's a great question. Is your change management approach dependent on a project? If so, how do you maintain that consistency? So if I could paraphrase the question, how do you balance consistency, methodology, tool sets with uniqueness and differing situations? And really, I would go back to, for that answer, I would go back to this slide right here, which sort of summarizes the objectives of change management, but it also summarizes the different tool sets or buckets of tools that we have. And the way I look at this is almost look at this as a dial. There might be things on here. Green, we're gonna spend a lot. We're gonna turn it up because we know a lot of A, B, or C. There might be other areas that are sort of a moderate focus, and there might be other areas that just aren't as important. I would argue that all these areas are important, but relatively speaking, if we have to prioritize, which most projects do, and we have to prioritize resources and focus with limited resources and focus. So that's the way to view it. Is it's not necessarily that your approach is totally going to change. It's just that the level of intensity for all these different areas are going to vary client by client. And then certainly some of the nuances and specific strategies and tactics within each of these buckets are going to vary just depending on the type of organization it is. But whenever we're deploying those differing approaches, we're using a common methodology and framework that is customizable, for lack of a better word, for different organizations. All right, so thank you for those great questions. I'm a little over my time that was allocated, but hopefully that was helpful. I appreciate your time today, and I'll turn it back to you, Parisa, to transition and discuss, get us into the next session here.
That sounds great. I appreciate it, Eric. And I do want to say, I do know what that game is. I swear.
You are old enough. Okay. I didn't know
I
if
am
that came
old
up
enough.
before your time. Did your parents tell you about it, or do you actually know from firsthand experience?
I played it. I played it growing up. Whack-a-mole. It was at Chuck E. Cheese, right?
Okay.
Anyways.
Yeah. I think it's still around. I think my kids played it too.
It's gotta be. It's a classic, right?
Oh, yeah. It's like Pac-Man.
It is like Pac-Man. I love it. Now, okay, you guys, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to dive into the panel discussion that Eric was talking about. Now, the biggest thing about this, and Eric, keep me honest, but I mean, all of these, this whole subject, all of these best practices, it's applicable, yes, obviously to software implementations, but really any kind of change that an organization is going through, whether it be like a merger, an acquisition, or if you're going through a reorg, if there's some type of change that your team is going to endure, this is applicable. So keep that in mind too. I mean, think big picture, think how is change affecting your team just in the day-to-day, and how can you pull these best practices into how you're operating. So with that said, I'm going to put a timer for 5 minutes. You guys can do whatever you need to do, and we will meet back here in 5 to go over our next topic. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Let's go ahead and dive into the next session. I am excited for this one because Q&As are really where you get the unfiltered answer. You know, it's not scripted, not that any of this is, but it's really just a impulse answer on something that you are asking. So like we have been doing this whole time, you guys have been doing an amazing job at dropping your comments, dropping your questions, but we encourage you to continue doing that. Whether you are on Crowdcast, whether you're on YouTube, if you're on LinkedIn, we are pulling all of your questions, all of your comments, and we're going to run through them in this session. And if we don't get to them in this session, then we will definitely get to them before the end of the workshop today. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into this panel discussion. I have Eric joining us again, as you can see, but we also have Julia, Teresa, and Nate joining us as well. So give you a little background. Julia Joyce is with us, and she's one of our go-to consultants when it comes to change management. She's qualified APMG change management practitioner, and she is actually based out of the UK. And really her experience and her tenure ranges across multiple industries. So higher education, financial services, automotive, and civil aviation. That sounds pretty fun. All of these industries, she was focused on change. So she has a well-versed background in what it takes to deliver a successful change management strategy, regardless of the industry that you're in. And I can't forget to mention, she also loves to cycle and she does digital illustrations. I would love to see one of those illustrations, Julia. That sounds awesome. And then we also have Teresa Richardson. So she is with us as well. And she is Lean Six Sigma black belt. And she also has her MBA. So she's very educated, experienced in her field. And she's also a certified coach. And I'm going to possibly butcher this, but a ProSci, is that how you say that? ProSci?
Change management, yeah.
For change management, she's also a change management practitioner, and she's certified through ProSci. So, very, very well versed in organizational change management, also across various industries, ranging from manufacturing, healthcare, IT logistics, financials, and wealth management. So, with that experience in both the public and private sector, she's able to speak to, again, whatever industry you are in, she's able to answer those questions. And in her free time, she loves to travel and she loves her fur babies. Who doesn't, right? We love those.
That too. Awesome.
I love it. And then we also have Nathan Strower. Am I saying your last name correctly, Nate?
He's on mute.
You're on mute. But I got a head nod, so I'm going to think that's a yes. I'm saying it right. So Nate oversees the whole OCM side at Third Stage, and he's our director of transformation and strategy. So he's actually going to be moderating our Q&A this afternoon. And Eric is also obviously joining us on the panel. So you'll have Eric, Julia, and Teresa answering all of your questions, and Nate is going to be facilitating. You guys know Eric. You just heard him drop some knowledge on you guys about OCM as well. So again, drop your questions, drop your comments. And Nate, I'm going to pass it over to you. If you hover over your video, there should be a mic button to unmute yourself.
Yeah, you know what happened, Priest? I muted him when he came on because I could hear background, so I just muted him, thinking he could unmute himself. And now I can't unmute him either. So he might have to drop off and come back in. I could. Let's try it. If you want to chat a question, I could let you do that. If you want a question in the chat, and then I'll start it, and then let you come out and come back in. Does that work? How many consultants does it take to?
Well, we have a question here, so I can pose a question for you guys. Does that work? And then while Nate drops off, gets back on, hopefully we'll have the mic going. So let's see. The first question, and forgive me if you already got to this, Eric, but we had a question come in that was, can you say that business analysis is part of organizational change management? And where does that fit into it?
Yeah, so we did cover that, but I'll maybe cover it anyway. It's a good segue or a good thing to cover again. But I would say yes, the business analysis piece of it, I would agree, does fit within change management, or at the very least, they should be very closely aligned. I'd be curious to hear Teresa and Julia. I know, Teresa, you're Six Sigma certified, so I imagine you probably have a strong opinion on this, but what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. It's definitely something that needs to be done right up front because, again, as you stated in the last segment, if you don't capture that information and you engage in change management activities, you could come across a situation where you have to take 10 steps back instead of moving forward. So having that information up front is very important. Even with a change management person in the activity itself, being able to ask them questions that might not have been asked is very good for developing that process to ensure that we're putting a plan together that really addresses all of the issues with the change.
Yeah, I think to echo that, I think that the best change managers are people who are nosy, who are naturally inquisitive and want to understand the detail behind things. So, I mean, usually on things in the past, I've had a business analyst to help me with that, but I haven't always had that luxury. So I think that it's a really good tool to have that ability just to be curious about how the organization works, to have that good, strong analysis skill.
Absolutely. Also, this just popped in my head, sorry, but working on projects that you need certain stakeholders involved right from the start. So making sure that the people who touch the process are in the room to help discuss it, to really vet it out, making sure that all of that occurs, because when you get to that change piece and you don't include those people, again, you might have to take some steps back, which prolongs your effort. So having that done is very important, in my opinion.
I agree.
Ooh, this is a good one. The soft skills question. I'm sorry, I was reading the panel. That's a good one.
Yeah, it looks like Nate, you're back, but you're not unmuted. Is it not letting you unmute? I can't unmute you either, which usually as a speaker I can. So I'm not sure why. All right. So how about I ask this? Or do you mind facilitating until Nate gets back in, Teresa?
I am happy to. Okay, let's do that one that you just pointed out, Teresa. So Liam Boyd asks, what sort of soft skills do you employ in managing people and clients? So for example, principled negotiation or conflict resolution, etc. Are there specific sets of skills you would recommend people to read up on and adopt into their people strategies?
I have a question. I have a statement. I got to answer this one because this to me is really the crux of what we're trying to achieve here. So the biggest skill that I've learned to develop over time is listen to understand versus listen to respond. So when you listen to understand, and it's really not as simple as you would think, you're like, oh yeah, I'll listen. No. So when you really take a step back to understand what that person is saying, and it's not just the verbal cues, it's the nonverbal cues as well. It's very, very telling to where their mind is going or what their need is or what their pain point is. So, I think we could have an entire discussion around nonverbal cues, verbal cues, etc. But being able to listen to understand versus respond is huge, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And, it gets back to the point I was talking about in the previous session about how on the surface, what people are saying might be different than what's actually reality. They might be saying, yeah, I'm on board with this change. This is great. I can't wait for this new system or this new process change or whatever it may be. But you also have to sort of read between the lines and understand, well, based on experience, I know that people in your position oftentimes will resist it, not because they're bad people, but because there's something else going on there. So you're kind of recognizing the situation, but also reading between the lines of what they say versus what the actual situation is.
Yeah, and to add to that, people change their views along the path. So while they might be, supportive in the beginning, something may change, and they may change their view for whatever reason. So again, it's about trying to make sure that you're following that narrative with them through the journey, and tracking their thoughts, views, that resistance, finding out who your supporters are as well, so that you can use them to your advantage. So it's about keeping listening to your client as well.
Yes, absolutely. And another soft skill is it's not really taught, but asking the why. We call it 5 whys in Lean Six Sigma. But if you ask enough questions and you really listen, in my experience, the person who you're speaking with will really bring their guard down because they understand you're listening to them, you're asking questions, you're taking their information, and you use it to develop your plan. So those, in my opinion, are a few soft skills. And just kind of sit back and smile, and a little humor never hurt, by the way. I'm just saying. So that's always a good thing.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking of humor, this is change that we are adjusting to as we figure out the mic situation. I got to give credit to Kyler for that one. She said that on the behind the scenes conversation. Now I think we have Nate back. Are you on?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Okay,
There
I'll
you
pass
go.
it over to you, my friend.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you. And yeah, that's it's almost like it was staged that we're trying to pose a point, or may really raise a point about change management. But thank you all for joining us. And I know you've been through the sessions today, and I think really a really good place to start. We got together last week to discuss change management, and it was really interesting that 4 people that all work side by side in the same company really had a different explanation of change management. And I think one of the challenges of change management, and something we all encounter doing the job that we do with the people that we work with, is change management always has a different meaning, a different connotation to whoever you ask, and from whatever angle or whatever experience or industry you come from. So I just wanted to start off with a really easy question to all 3 of you, and I think we could just go around the horn here. How would you describe, or what are the words you'd use to describe change management, and how would you describe change management in general, and how we approach change management at Third Stage Consulting?
Sure. So,
Well,
go ahead, Eric. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll add to what you said.
To me, change management is really helping individuals, teams, and organizations through the change process in a structured way with a methodology. It's really important to understand where they're needing to go from current to future state, and then to develop the plan, working with stakeholders and change agents to get there. So looking at the entire organization as a whole and understanding their culture and where the organization is set up is very important.
Yeah, it's absolutely about taking people through a change. Most changes, and not all of them now, are about implementation of new platforms or new software. And while a new system and a nice new shiny system is excellent, it's only going to go so far if it's not adopted by the people. And Eric talked about this prior to this. People have their own reasons for resistance, so they're not always active reasons. So I think it's about trying to understand where people are, and it's trying to get them to the point where you want them to be. And that's quite a tricky journey, because people can be quite difficult. There's a million different types of personalities out there. So it's about taking people on that journey and making sure they adopt that new way of working.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, when we talked about this last week, it was mentioned that unless your process is like 99.9% automated, you have to address the people side of the change. You absolutely have to, because, even with usage and adoption, if you have someone who shakes their head like, yep, this is change, we're going to do it, and all I have to do is push the button, and that's all their ownership is with this process, we're in trouble. So change management will be great.
I think also when it comes to automation of processes, I think there's sometimes people go, well, it's been automated, it's fine. Actually, automation of processes scares people, because they say, am I going to lose my job? What does it mean for me? I'm a bit scared. And people are resistant to automation. So you have to try and manage that too.
Yeah. And there's also, just building on what you both just said, is when you look at something like, especially some of these emerging newer technologies like machine learning or artificial intelligence, I think when you start to get into those newer technologies and the more advanced technologies, the harder change is and the more significant change management is going to be. Because if you think about, to your guys' point about machine learning, let's just use that as an example. You're going to introduce machine learning into your accounts payable processes. And now all of a sudden you're going to automate 70% of what you're doing manually right now. Well, that's great. There's a clear business case for that. You've got an ROI. The technology makes sense, but not so great when you're the AP clerk that your job is going to be 70% automated.
Mhm.
And it's easy to say, well, yeah, don't worry about it. You're just going to be more strategic, or you're going to be more of a manager and, that sort of thing. Okay, well, that's great, but I don't believe you unless you tell me what exactly my job is going to look like in the future. So those are the sort of dots we have to connect as change management practitioners.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more important and more strained as technology advances faster.
Yeah, and then I see that Liam's just posted and said that automation means that someone has to give up control, which is scary for people. So absolutely, if you've, done your job on a spreadsheet for 15 years and you know how to manage it and it's your baby, and then suddenly the organization comes along and says, right, we're going to automate this. You're like, but that's my baby, that's my cottage industry. I don't want to give it up. It's a scary time for people.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it's really important when you have those changes coming to get ahead of that communication, because just had a discussion the other day on, we're making these changes and the individuals in the organization heard this and they have this perception now. So you really have to get ahead of that and understand what the vision is for the client. How are we going to do this and make the communication so it's tailored to the audience. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's just absolutely. And I think that I know people conflate communications and OCM all the time, but it is an absolute integral part of it. If you don't communicate and you don't tell people what's happening, the rumor mill starts, and then people then start to get upset because they hear things happen, and then that's how resistance grows. That's how it mushrooms. So it's absolutely about getting in early and being honest with people as well. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes it's okay to say, we don't know.
And just as an FYI, we have not rehearsed this, and we're not throwing each other segues, even though that was a perfect segue from one to the other.
Hours now.
Yeah, I'm losing my value as a moderator because you're just able to transition from one topic to another. What I want to start off with a quick story, and I tell this off. We in one of our change management engagements, we talked about why the client was so resistant to change, and we were all kind of laughing, saying, "Boy, they shouldn't be. Everything should be fine. They should be resistant to change. We're all open to change." Then about 5 minutes later, we changed our email address, and everyone is just furious. Like, how can we work in these conditions? So I think it's really interesting that everyone thinks they're immune to resistance to change, and yet they really aren't. So I wanted to just get a quick idea from the three of you, starting with Julia. Why do you feel people are so resistant to change? And this is far outside of technology. This is just in general. Why do you think that?
There's lots of different reasons. Uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen. I think custom and practice as well, that you have your job, you're comfortable with your job. People don't really like change. They say that to your point, they say that they do, but then they don't, because they don't like to not know what's coming next. And I think that the whole of last year with COVID is a great example of that. Is that we've all had to adapt, but we've done it, and we did it, and there was a lot of complaining and moaning, but we did it because we had to. And I think that people just generally don't like change. We're like cats. We like a routine. We like to do what we do. And I think when that's coupled with uncertainty, people start to become a little bit uncomfortable.
You're muted.
Oh, here we go again. Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I hadn't thought about the cat analogy before. I'm more of a dog person.
You're welcome. Oh,
there you go.
Now I always think about cats when I think of change now. But no, I think there is some truth to that. It's that we're creatures of habit. We like to do things a certain way, and I think a lot of it comes down to pride too. If I work at a company for 20 years and I pride myself in the fact that my heroics have helped further the organization, and all this tribal knowledge I have in my head that can't be replaced, I feel good about that. I'm adding a lot of value to the organization, and you can't dismiss that. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, but that's a risk, or, oh, we can't have it all in Eric's head or anyone's head. We've got to have it in a system. That may be true, but from the individual perspective, I take pride in that. And now you're just telling me you're going to take it away and automate it. And what does that mean for me? And it just creates so much doubt. So I think, we're creatures of habit. We take pride in what we do. There's just fear and uncertainty. I think that's probably one of the biggest things is just the fear and uncertainty of not knowing what it means to get all that stuff out of my head and automate it. Sounds good, looks good on a business case, but for me personally, am I going to have a job, or am I just going to be doing nothing? It's just I think the more clearly we can define some certainty around people's jobs, even if they don't like it as much or they don't think they're going to like it as much as the current state, at least they know what to expect and where we're going.
Yeah, and it gives them the chance to decide early up what they want to do about it. You don't have to accept change. You can leave a company or you can do whatever you want to do. But certainly forearmed is forewarned with people. It's good to get them. It's good to give them that choice up front about what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Teresa, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, they took all my thunder. No, I'm only joking.
Sorry.
No, I'm only joking. No. So I do agree with the uncertainty of change, but I think a lot of it has to do actually with a couple of things. So fear, loss, and trust. I also believe that a person's disposition sets them up for how they're going to react to change. Like for me, I love change. I have an old adage, if change is like the dinosaur, if you don't change or die. And do you see any dinosaurs running around? No, because they didn't want to evolve, right? So I think the disposition of the person or the organization has a lot to do with it as well. And trust is huge. If your leader comes to you and you don't trust them and they give you this, we're going to do this, this, and this, and you're like, oh, I don't know about that. But if you really trust them and you believe in the vision, and you believe in what we're doing as a culture and as a company, 9 times out of 10, you'll really embrace that change. So that's what I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I know Eric mentioned this, but change needs to happen top down. I really believe that you're only going to get so far with adoption unless your senior managers walk the walk and talk the talk and are open and honest and listen to you. People aren't stupid and they can spot insincerity. So I think it's really important that they are given the tools to be armed to ask questions of and to feedback and use them as a sort of brokering line between what's happening, and also get them to buy in as well. Because if they're not bought in, as Teresa absolutely says, they're not going to really engender their team to buying into anything.
Absolutely. Trust is huge.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about why are people resistant to change, what defines somewhat what is change management. Let's take a step back and really kind of dig more into the nuts and bolts of it. And I want to ask the three of you, we'll start with Teresa this time and go counterclockwise. Really, how do you think or what's your best advice or what's your best strategy for how you get started? We'll dig a little bit deeper into the task and the work streams of change management. But really, if you had to advise a client, if you're on a phone call with a client and they say, Teresa, I want to get started, where would you advise them? How would you advise them on the best way to dig in and get started?
So the best way I heard this was, I believe as Eric stated it, what do you want to be when you grow up? What is your vision? Where do you want to go from your current state to your future state? And I think that is a telling conversation, especially with a senior leader, because if they give you like the high level examples, like I want to do 20% this or blah, 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 versus someone who has actually put intentional time and thought into where they want to go, that helps us create a better roadmap for success. The more ambiguity we have, the more digging we have to do, which is fine. That's what we do. Not shy at all about it. But again, if you have a leader who takes the time, cares about the organization, this is what I want for us. This is where we're going to go. That's easier for me to, so having that clear vision and being able to articulate that is huge to me.
Yeah. And building on that too, Teresa, you go on a level down in the organization. You think about specific departments or business units or locations within your organization, being able to define for them, specific to them and their location or their job, what that vision is and how it's, how they're first of all, what's going to change, how it's going to change, and how that contributes to that higher level vision that you're describing, Teresa. I think that helps connect the dots, because you have to have that vision that you describe as a prerequisite, but then you have to get to that next layer, which is what's in it for me, or how does it relate to me? How am I going to change?
Yeah, Eric, and I think we were with a client earlier this week, and I think that's a really great point, and actually something that was brought up almost in those exact words, where we started with our strategic alignment, and we said, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are your 5 biggest goals, missions, visions for the next 1, 3, and 5 years? And the CEO read it out. I mean, it was textbook example of like, here's where we want to be, here's how we're going to get there, here's where we're weak, here's where we're strong, here's where we need help. I mean, it was just great. And the challenge that she threw to us is, she said, that being said, everyone in this room is very clear on where we're going. Our biggest challenge is to filter that down throughout the organization. And she said, this task a year and a half ago looked like X, Y, and Z as far as getting the message out. But now we're coming off a global pandemic. We have a new staff. We still have a ton of uncertainty in the workplace. So we really need to not only take what we have here, but learn how to decipher that message for where the workforce is now, where it'll be 3 months from now and 6 months from now. So it's that I think people often underestimate the fact that there's one thing to know where you're going, and one thing to be able to deliver and have everyone in the organization understand what that vision is as well. Yeah. Anything to add to that, Julia?
No. Well, yes. No, yes. Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. Vision, you need to know where you're going. And I think the second point is that you need to know where you are right now. So I think, you need to have that discovery phase where you understand exactly where you are, what the delta is between the two, and how you're going to, and that's what your plan is how you're going to reach that gap between A and B. And I think one of the challenges, I always say I think when I know. One of the challenges that I've experienced is that people, especially senior management, will say, well, show us what you're doing now, give us the benefit now. We want to see some comms, we want to see, we want to see things. And it's a difficult challenge, because lots of things with change, there's planning, there's a lot of things that you need to do up front, which is what Teresa and I will talk about in our next session. And a lot of the benefits are further down the line. And while people want to see comms just so that they're comfortable that they're getting bang for their buck, actually the most important thing to do is start from a really strong foundation of where are you now, and
Absolutely.
where do you want to be?
Absolutely. So when in the past, when I've received that pushback, okay, this is what I want, go do it now, do it now, do it now.
Yeah.
The question always is, okay, you know what, let's talk about this. Do you want it done right now, or do you want it done the right way? And the look on their faces when I say that is priceless, but there's always 2 different consequences for each path. And I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, it's let's do it the right way, because you put a lot of time, a lot of investment, not just financial, but resources, et cetera, into something. You want to make sure that when you're completed, well, it's really not ever completed, but when you're done with the initiative, it's successful.
So taking that, then we'll get to the next step. So we, no matter what change management looks like, it basically breaks down into 4 tasks, or what we call work streams, and that is strategic alignment. So what we talked about earlier, what do you want to be when you grow up, and is there alignment within the organization? Org readiness, how ready is your organization for change? How hard is this change going to be on your staff? Is it going to be a shift, or is it going to be a paradigm shift, which is a way overused consulting phrase, and I promise not to use that again. And then we talk about the communications piece of it, and the education and training. So roughly, you could call it many different things, but it's roughly those 4 things. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask the panel today, from your experience, and if you were again advising a new client, what do you feel is the most important task? And I can ask that in a different way as well. What task do you feel that is often, if not completed successfully, kind of dooms the change management effort for failure? And why don't we start with you again, Teresa, and we'll go around the horn again.
Sure. So one of the initiatives that I've seen doesn't get enough attention after you do the assessments and get the information is the communication plan. I think people don't really understand, well, I shouldn't say that. The traditional way of a communication plan is structured in such a way where it really does not address what the change is, how it's impacting people, et cetera, et cetera. So when I've done change communication plans, we've done like message mapping, and we focus on the rhetoric model. So it has to be logical. You has to have an emotion tied to it. It needs to come from someone credible. So it really kind of answers the question before it's even asked. So when you do that and you address the issue, you create what? You create trust. You create, okay, they're hearing us, they're listening to us. So it's not just, hey, everybody, our system's going to change next week. Good luck. It has to be more intentional than that. It has to even go beyond the dates and things like that. So the communication plan, in my opinion, needs to have certain elements to really not just communicate, but to create the ownership and the accountability of the people who we are wanting to have the change impact.
Yeah. Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. So I won't take the same answer, but I guess one of the it's hard to pick one. I guess that's the hard part of that question. It's hard to pick one that's the most important because they all kind of fit together, and there's so much interconnectivity between them. But I'd say one is something we talked about in the last session today, which is the business process improvements and having a clear sort of business blueprint, not a technology or software blueprint, but a business blueprint for what the organization is going to look like from an operational perspective. And then ultimately that feeds into the organizational design, the organizational impacts. And that's even if we skip that step, it doesn't matter how well we do all the other change management stuff. We're on shaky ground and we don't have that foundation or that blueprint to work from. So that's one. And I guess I'd say it's tied. It's either that, in my opinion, or the organizational assessment piece of it, which, you kind of need that just to understand the lay of the land and to really understand where what the culture is and what the nuances of the organization are.
Yeah. And I think to add on what you're talking about, is I think it's really scary when you really know you have a lot of work when you come into a client and they say, we're ready, we don't have a lot of change to do. Or when you get the client that says, oh, we've been thinking about this a lot, and they open up a 30 slide deck saying, here's where we need to change. Because it's likely the answer somewhere in between, but it really is. Anyone that thinks that there's no change coming up and everything's going to be fine is really kidding themselves. And anyone that thinks that the world's coming to an end is probably kidding themselves as well. It's somewhere in between, and they're probably a lot more capable of handling the change than they think. But there's also a lot that they don't know that they need to be aware of.
Agreed.
What about you, Julia? You're the third, so you only have one or two answers to give.
I'm going to go left field, and I'm going to say about benefits.
Benefit realization. That's a good one. Agreed.
Because I find, and I have found in the past that and I think it's because OCM is a bit misunderstood, that people, when you're trying to sell the value of OCM to an organization or to a client, they can see it as a bit of an add-on, or it's a nice to have. And actually, what you're trying to do is, it does link to benefits. What you're trying to do is increase customer satisfaction, reduce cost, increase the organization's profile. So they all of your change initiatives do link to benefits. And I think that link and that demonstration of that to the people that give you the money to do the initiative is really important, because then it shows you that actually it's just as important as having a project manager or an SI or any of the roles that you wouldn't necessarily question.
Mm-hmm.
I vote for yours. That was good.
No, and I think the one thing to add to yours, and I think benefits is so far overlooked, but I think it's really important too that you have realistic benefits. If you go into an OCM engagement, or if management goes and promises the world to their employees that your job is going to be the easiest job in the world. Your customers are going to be happy. You're setting yourself up for failure, and it will literally, I think it'll literally show itself sooner rather than later. So if you go in and say, hey, here's going to be some of the tough sledding that we're going to have over the next 6 months. We're going to go live. Things aren't going to be a ton better when we go live, but in 2-3 months after go live, here's what you can expect. Then you really build a trust. And again, to talk about what Teresa talked about, you're managing the message. You're giving them a realistic idea of what's going to happen. You're delivering the message, and you're giving them a realistic idea of the change that's coming, so that they don't go and create their own message and create their own reality off of what they think is going to happen versus what you feel is projected to happen.
Yeah.
So now that we talked about kind of the most important steps, why change management, what's the importance of change management, what do you feel is the best way to position an organization for successful change? So if you had to say we were doing this project at Third Stage Consulting, how would you best position us, or how would you best kick this project off and position this project so that it'll be successful or it'll make it the most chances for success in the future? Maybe starting with you, Julia.
Oh, thanks. I always think that honesty is one of the key tenets of anything, especially with OCM. Is that honesty and the ability to understand requirements is really key, and also an understanding of who does what role as well. I think Eric said earlier on that while we can lead change for a client, change is best coming from the organization itself. If I come in and sent out a communications, or tried to train some people, they were like, who are you? What have you got to add to the organization? Whereas it needs to be, the organization needs to be bought into it and understand that, they have a part to play in that as well. And it's very much a hand-in-hand effort.
Eric?
we can provide the expertise, but we need the client to bring something to the table too.
Yeah, we don't do change management. We guide you through the change management.
Absolutely.
We're not going to do it for you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we can't, because, we who's going to, with the best will in the world, that, people don't know me and a client from Adam, whereas they might know, the chief operating officer, and they're more inclined to listen and believe in that person than a consultant who they've never met before. And it's all about building, as Teresa says, it's about building trust.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As well as identifying the right individuals to influence the change once we have the information that we need. Interesting story, working on a project, and they wanted to assign this role to a PM. When the PM has so much to do, you can't, you have to make
all the time.
You have to make sure that you have the right people in the right place to communicate the right message to get what you need done. And if that doesn't happen, we are in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges with change management that you're alluding to, Teresa, is that you can't see and touch and feel change management. So to your point about just handing it off to a project manager, limited time and resources, you have two options. You can either do all the change management stuff that you should be doing, or you can do the stuff that's broken with the technology that you can see and touch and feel. And so that's broken. I can see and touch and feel it. It's not, we're not getting through testing the way we should. So I'm going to redirect all my attention over here. And it happens every time. Like, I can't remember a time where a PM successfully managed change, because inevitably the needle shifts, or the focus shifts over to the technology
Absolutely.
side.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have a bunch of questions. So I thought let's, before we jump into the questions here to kind of wrap things up, I will end with the ultimate open-ended question or open-ended questions for the three of you, and maybe starting with Eric on this one. What can you tell us is your most successful change management engagement? Why do you feel it was successful? And what was your biggest challenge? What was your most challenging change management engagement? And why do you feel that the challenges were in place, or what led to those challenges?
Funny you should ask that, and it's a segue into it's another segue. Now you're setting up the segues. Actually, as you were asking that, the first person or the first client that comes to mind is actually a client that I'm going to have on a live stream tomorrow. Every Friday I do a live stream Q&A type thing with different guests, and I use that for our podcast that comes out every week. But I live stream it live just so we can get questions from the audience and whatnot. But he's going to be on the live stream tomorrow. So if this is of interest to you, I'd highly encourage you to check that out. But the reason I bring him up is because that client in particular, which is a big steel company, I think have been the most effective at managing change. And the irony of it, though, and this is where I'm kind of conflicted about sharing the story because it goes against what we're saying here. First of all, I'll preface it by saying this company has a very unique culture. They have a very strong culture, very unique culture. They're very successful. There have been books written about them. They're well studied in the world of academia and business. And they're in the midst, they're a massive company, and they're going through they're in the middle of a 7-year transformation. And they have not had, for the most part, they have not had a separate change team. They've taken what I would call more of a Trojan horse approach to change management. They've embedded the change function within all the different business process and operational leads, not the project manager, which I think we all agree is a bad idea, but more at the process lead level of the business areas. And part of it is because culturally they just don't like consultants. And that's the irony of having them as a client, is they don't really like consultants, but they like us. But they like to own things themselves. Like they want to be advised, but then they want to run with it, which is great. It works really well for them and it fits their culture. So they found a way to sort of embed change management in everything they do. And that's extremely hard to do. And it's honestly, I think it's more a function of their DNA and their culture, which has, like I said, been highly studied in academia and whatnot. So they have a very strong culture in that way. So it works for them. I don't think it would work for a lot of organizations the same way it works for them, but it does work for them. So I think the fact that they have such strong ownership and that they embed change within everything they do, they don't rely too much on consultants. They're one of the best clients I've ever with, if not the best, at managing consultants, saying we want to use you for this specific thing, and we're not going to let you take over the entire transformation. And when I say this isn't a problem with us, but a problem with other, like system integrators, for example. System integrators and a lot of clients will completely take over a project and sort of steamroll the client, and client doesn't have any ownership and sort of takes that outsource approach. This client's the opposite. They say, no, we're managing this. We'll pull in the experts where we need them, but it's our project. We own it. If we mess it up, it's on us. And they've done a good job of it. So I think that's probably been the best example. They're honestly one of the best companies. I think one of the best run companies I've ever consulted. That's what makes it great to have them as a client. So that would probably be the best example I could give you.
Great. So then we'll I'm sorry.
I say tune in tomorrow for more on that. There's a shameless plug for you to listen to the live stream tomorrow.
Yeah, everyone's going to be excited to see who the successful client is. That's awesome.
I'm not telling you. You have to join the live stream.
So Eric gave a success story. Julia or Teresa, you want to tell one of your bigger challenging stories?
Sure.
Oh, there we go.
Sure. So one of my biggest challenges was working with a healthcare system that needed to move the mindset of a certain group of healthcare. I don't want to call anybody out. Healthcare providers, because they've been trained traditionally to think autonomously. So you can't really participate in a change, or you can't really, in their minds, it was more like, I understand what I have to do. I was trained to do this. Just let me go do it. But with the ACH and other regulations coming down the line, we needed to work as a team. So that particular project was very difficult because these particular groups of individuals actually were the bread and butter of the system. And again, I'm trying not to call anybody out here, but it was a very difficult work through. Eventually, we did achieve what we were needing to do because they were accepting of being part of the change team, a part of the initiatives. And honestly, when you give them that authority, I think that was a trigger. It was that authority that they had. They kind of ran with it. So again, you have to identify how people think and what they do and really speak to that. as well as making sure that you get the deliverables completed. And I did that in such a political way. I was being very, very careful on how I was saying it. But that was one of my biggest challenges is meeting that resistance head on. Because these changes we needed to make were not local. It was more of a federal. So it wasn't an issue of I don't want to do it. It's an issue of you have to do it because it's tied to the revenue for the system. So, yeah. And that's all I'm going to say about that one.
Okay. That's going to be a little harder to decipher that client.
Shh.
So Julia, you could go. Why don't you finish us off with either a success or a challenge, and then we'll jump into questions.
Sure. Let me just tell you about a challenge that's different from Teresa's. I've worked for clients before, and one that springs to mind is where there's a clear need to do something, and I wasn't a consultant there. I was part of the organization, but there was a clear need to do something, but the management level couldn't decide what to do. So of course, we were all raring to go. We had a strategy ready, but we were kind of like, well, we know the top level of it, but what does it mean underneath? And there was so much, people at that level couldn't quite decide what it meant to them. And there's only so much you can do to try and influence that, especially when there are other things going on like COVID and, there was various other, it was in civil aviation. So, there's plenty of things going on, and trying to make that a priority for them so you could do something about it without trying to miss opportunities was, quite difficult to do. You certainly need to get people in there that are, that have their ear to make them listen and put that as a priority on their table.
Great. All right. Well, let's jump to a couple questions, and I think there's an interesting one, and this came from a point that I think we made about a half an hour ago. We were asked, automated. I'll just read it. Automating a process means that someone has to give up control, and losing control is scary. People predicted that in the IT revolution in the 90s and onwards would reduce to a loss in jobs, but it actively created jobs instead. Not only people who could create, fix, and manage computers, but also for those who could use them. Do we think that automation, and particularly AI, will also lead to more jobs? What are anyone want to jump in on answering that question?
I've got an interesting example from the city that I live in, and I think they have them in the US as well. We have Starship robots, where they'll come and deliver your food from a store, but they don't deliver wine, which is very disappointing. So they'll come and deliver things from the store, and I see on Facebook and social media that people say, "Oh, these robots are stealing our jobs," and actually they're not, because all that they're doing is moving the work from someone else that needs to go and still get the thing from the shelf and do all the work behind the scenes and put it in the robot and program the robot. So actually, it doesn't always translate into someone's going to lose their job, because somebody still has to do the other work on the other side of it for the benefit for the customer.
And I'd say that I agree with that comment, but I think that's a long-term view, which is important. But if I'm an employee that's affected by that change, and I'm living paycheck to paycheck, or I've got my own immediate needs, I'm not necessarily going to back up and look at the forest for the trees, see the forest for the trees. Yeah. I'm not going to say, "Oh, well, it's okay if I lose my job," because it's just there's going to be demand for me elsewhere, and I can reskill or retool. That's just not the way we think. It might be in the long term, it might actually be more opportunistic or better for us. But if in the short term we think it might, or we have the fear that it could affect us negatively, we're still going to resist it. So I think big picture wise, yeah, I totally agree with that. But when you're dealing again on the front lines with people that are affected by the change, it's just, that's not the reality that they see or that is real to them.
Absolutely. So for a practical example, I've been to Target. We'll call it Target. It's really Target. But you see many self-checkouts, right? So before there were checkout people and baggers and this and that. So with the self-checkout, you just reduce until, to Eric's point, someone just possibly lost their job. So I think if automation and AI were to continue, the discussion definitely has to occur on how to position the people who could be displaced into a better role or a better opportunity. Because, you know, you go to Target and you go from 10 to 5 people manning these stations. So it's a clear indicator of where we're going.
And I think the one thing that is also, I think the one thing that is also pretty important to say, and we talk about this in our clients as well, is that for the most part, technology is there to help you think more strategically. So, you know, I can't speak specifically for the Target example, but it does, in many ways, it allows you to eliminate the laborious, like the tasks that are not really adding value, and allowing you to get to a place where you do add value and you are thinking strategically and you are taking what's given and doing something with it. It's easier said than done, and it's really hard for someone to see, especially like Eric said, when you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're afraid of losing your job. That's a challenge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One last question before we jump back over to Parisa. I think there's been, the point was made, panel members have a variety of clients and experience with many different platforms. What's the best way to acquire technology, knowledge, and experience?
I mean, the way I view it, I always go back to my first, one of my first ERP digital transformation type projects where I was the change practitioner, but I had, been trained in the technology and whatnot. And over time, even as I was involved in other types of technology that weren't SAP, which is where I started, but, I got involved with Oracle implementations and eventually Microsoft. And I was in the utilities industry for a while, and I knew nothing about the utilities industry. So I had to kind of learn it from scratch. But just as an example, I think that's part of what makes you a good change management consultant, is being able to adapt and learn faster than the organization or the individuals affected within an organization are going to. And it allows you to relate a little bit better to them too. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I know a lot of people would say, well, to be a good SAP change management consultant, you need to know SAP really well. And yeah, it does help, but I don't know that it's, I think the key is that you're willing to get your hands dirty and understand and learn the processes and the way the technology works. And so that you can help pave the way for the others that are, the employees, the frontline employees that are going to be affected. So it doesn't hurt for sure. I mean, if you're going to go through implementation of technology X, then go learn as much as you can about technology X as soon as you can. But if it turns out that it ends up being technology Y and you know nothing about technology Y, I don't think that's necessarily a liability that you need to be overly concerned about. It just means you have to dive in a little bit deeper, roll up your sleeves, and learn it a little bit faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I've started a million change initiatives without knowing anything about it, from collection systems to, data protection to cybersecurity. And if you only ever, never limit to your current expertise, you can't, because you're going to ring fence yourself. So it's just, you learn and you pick it up, and it's all about that business analysis side, just about being naturally curious about how things work and asking questions and showing that you can understand, because it's okay not to know, but we all learn.
Absolutely. I agree with all that, as well as the fact that when you're engaging in a team that maybe you don't have that experience, you don't have that exposure to that industry, letting people know that you're the expert in what you do and you're going to partner with them because they're the experts in what they do, creates a huge channel of open communication and trust, in my opinion. So being able to roll your sleeves up and not having the hubris of, oh, I know everything, be willing to learn, be willing to try, be willing to ask questions that even if you think is a dumb question, ask it anyways, because I've heard this 10,000 times since I was like 5, but sometimes when you ask the question, there could be someone who had the same exact question. So question probing, willing to learn, rolling your sleeves up is what I would suggest as well.
100%.
Great. Well, thank you all for participating today. And I think I know Parisa will hit on this as well, but would like to ask anyone who's on the call, if we weren't able to answer your questions, or if there was anything that we throughout there today that didn't make sense or that you'd like to discuss further, please give us a call. Please shoot us an email, and we're happy to line up a Zoom call with you, or just get a hold of you on the phone, talk more about what your challenges are and how we might be able to help you in the future. Or if you're going through a change management initiative now and you just have some questions on what's going on, please let us know, and we'd be happy to give you our thoughts on it.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better, Nate. And great job to all of the panelists. Those were some amazing insights. So thank you for shedding your knowledge on us. Appreciate it. Great. So I got to say, one of the pieces that stood out to me was when you guys were talking about vision and how executive teams need to have a vision for where they're going, and taking it a step further, being able to have it trickle down to the rest of the team in order to get from A to B. You have to sell it, if you will. And the other side of it too, if you're in middle management and you see the importance of, putting an organizational change management strategy in place and your leadership team doesn't necessarily see the value, you sell it upwards, you manage up. So, I mean, it's kind of building on that team aspect, whether you're on the, top of the org chart or somewhere else, of how are we going to get to where we're going. And a lot of that, it comes down to the people side of it. So I love that point. I loved all the points you guys made. And I love all these questions coming through. You guys are amazing. So we're going to, just so you know, we're keeping track of all of these questions. We're doing our absolute best to get to them today. But if we don't, we're writing all of these down and we're going to use it to create our content going forward, whether that's, in our videos, in our blogs, in our podcast topics. We're listening to what you're saying, and we're going to translate that into some more ideas around the subject. So keep the questions coming. We'll hopefully get to them today. If not, keep an eye out for your question to pop up in one of our podcasts or other content that we constantly are rolling out. So with that said, let's go ahead and do a couple of housekeeping items before we go to break. I want to take a 5-minute break, but just so you know, we're going to send the replay link for this entire workshop out, as well as all of our contact information, so that you guys are able to reach out to us directly, just like Nate was just saying. If you had a specific topic that you wanted to share with a team, or, just listen to again to refill ideas, you'll have the replay link, as well as the slides. As Eric mentioned, we're happy to send out the slides for each of these presentations as well. You'll also see a button. If you're on Crowdcast, you'll see a button at the bottom of the screen that says 2021 Digital Transformation Report. If you are not on Crowdcast, we're happy to put the link in the comments if you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, so you have access to it. But at a high level, this is a report that Third Stage Consulting puts out annually, and it covers a very in-depth view of all things digital transformation. So, you have things from the average transformation times and costs, depending on the size of the company. You have a list of the top, ERP, CRM, HCM systems, ranked depending on whatever industry you're in. There's just so many different pieces of content, different ideas, statistics that you could dive into. So click that link right now. We'll put it in the link or in the comments as well. And you can download it for free and have that information to take with you as well. All right, so let's go ahead and take another quick 5-minute break. We'll jump back into it, and I'm going to invite Teresa and Julia back up with us, and we're going to dive deeper into organizational change management. So we'll be back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Let's dive into the third session. This is the third and final session for the day, and I feel like we've definitely done more than scratch the surface. We've made a pretty good dent, but we are going to dive even deeper. This is the title of this segment is Change Management Methodology Deep Dive. So Teresa, Julia, and Nate are going to really peel back the layers to what it takes to drive transformation success or failure. I mean, we talk about ERP success, ERP failures a lot here at Third Stage just because we believe that you will learn a lot from case studies. And a lot of the time it comes down to how well were they able to manage change and manage just the new normal for their team. So with that said, I want to invite Teresa and Julia and Nate back up here. I think I see Teresa. I think I see Julia. She's sharing her screen. So Nate, I'd love to invite you back up. You know, their expertise shines through that conversation that we just had. They are the experts, and this is literally what they focus on daily, is how can we help our clients and our organizations that we work with meet kind of the finish line of whatever transformation they're going to. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Julia, Teresa, and I believe Nate is going to be up here momentarily, and you guys can take it away on an even deeper dive into OCM.
Awesome.
Okay. I'm sharing my screen, but I can't see if I'm on mute or not, so I assume that I'm not.
Yep.
Can you guys hear me? Yep, cool, fabulous. All right, so welcome to our deep dive. Let's do this. Right, so welcome to our deep dive. So Teresa and Nate and I are going to be in this session. So first of all, give you a quick introduction about us. And you can see pictures of us and where we're representing as well. So I'm from Scotland, although I've lived in England for about 20 years now. I live just north of London. I am an APMG change management practitioner. I've worked in OCM for about 12 years now, and I've worked before for lots of big British companies and global companies. I've worked for EasyJet, I have worked for Volkswagen Group, I've worked in higher education, and lots of strings to my bow, but I advise on strategy development, stakeholder communication, stakeholder approaches, and benefits realization, amongst other things. So Teresa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So thank you for that. So hello again. My name is Teresa Richardson, and I am a ProSafe certified change manager, certified coach as well, Lean Six Sigma black belt, and I have an MBA as well. My experience ranges from manufacturing to healthcare, IT, logistics, and financial and wealth management. So I am from Michigan. So if anybody from Michigan knows, you either have your career start off in automotive or healthcare. So I have been able to have the benefit of being in both.
Yeah. Is Nate joining us?
Yes, I believe he is.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm here.
Good to go.
There you go.
Oh, hi, Nate.
Yes.
Hello.
Nate,
Okay.
you're on. It's your turn.
Okay. Hi, this is Nate Storm, a director of digital transformation with Third Stage. And my career has mostly been spent around the finance and energy industry. I started off my career with Deloitte Consulting, working in their digital transformation group around finance transformation. Since then, I've been working for about the last 12 years in organizational change management and software selection and technology strategy, working on all three different aspects of those projects. So with Third Stage, work on a lot of projects that bring all three of those together in one project.
Fab. Great. So, okay, so we know that we're here to talk about a deep dive. Teresa said that, we're going to dive into the detail of OCM, but just to give us a heads up, just so we know what to expect. Firstly, what do we mean by OCM? I think it means a lot of things to a lot of people. What are our guiding principles? What do we do as a consultancy? How do we do it? what's our approach and our methodology, and of course any questions that you've got. As with two sessions before, just jump in, put your questions in the text box, and we'll try and answer them as well. Okay.
So one thing I just want to interject here is if there are pieces that we're not able to get to because of the time constraint, I believe this is available to our audience. So
absolutely, we can definitely share this for sure. All right. So first of all, what is OCM? So I hear all the time, and I've heard a lot of times in my career, oh, it's just a bit of training, or if we do a bit of communication, that will be enough, or it's our change control process. And I hear, I've heard so many times that change management or OCM has been that role or that capability has been given to a project manager to do on top of the project management role when it comes to delivering change. And it's obviously more than that. And I think the assumption sometimes can be, well, a project manager can pick that up, but that's not their skill set. So I think there's it's misunderstood. It's a misunderstood child. So, but it's more than that. It's more than just training or comms. And if you've listened to the previous sessions that we've had tonight, it's about the people side of change. And it's about getting people through the change curve or the transformation or whatever you want to call it, whatever that change is, with as little disruption and pain as possible. And we're not saying no disruption or no pain because, we're realistic. That's sometimes not possible. Sometimes, changes are a disbenefit to people, but it's about helping people and just managing that transition from the old way of working to the new way of working. There are things that are involved within that. So there are processes in any change. Organizational processes will change. The people that use those processes will change. Their skill sets will change because of that. Technologies change. So if you're implementing an ERP, clearly that's a massive technological difference where automation might happen for some of your processes, or you may have a completely different way of working from the way that you work at the moment, and that therefore may mean that the organizational structure will change. So job families will change, job roles will change. So lots of things can happen as a result of technological change, and it's about managing the people through that. So it's about understanding, and it's about accepting, and it's about embracing change. And the key skill set for me, and we talked about this before, is about understanding the way of the world and understanding what's in it for people and what's not in it for people, and just understanding how it is for them. And the key point is that there are many elements to the work stream. As with anything with project management, it's complicated. There are toolkits, there are things that you can do to help yourself, and we're here today just to give you the deep dive into that. So let me just move this on. So in answer to the question, do we really need to bother with change with OCM? And yes, absolutely. You can deliver a new system. You can create and implement an ERP. That's great. You've got a new system, but it's only going to go so far unless your people are involved and they're on board and they are ready for the new way of working. They are bought into the new way of working. If they're not bought into the new way of working, you can understand what the resistance is. You can target that resistance, and it also gives you the opportunity to embed new ways of working before go live, so that on day one, no one's sitting at a desk going, "I don't know what to do with Oracle. I don't know what to do with Workday." It's about making sure that those happen. But moreover as well, it's about adoption and sustainability of change. And it's making sure that those changes stick, so that people do the right thing going forward, so that they don't find shortcuts in the system that provide disbenefits. It's about making sure that we make sure that the things that we do are the right things and that our organization is primed and ready to take those on. Yeah, does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Any comments from Teresa and Nate?
No, not at this point. I want to be respectful of people's time, and we literally have like 40 minutes. So yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, then let's talk about common OCM challenges. So, Teresa.
Sure. So, we've mentioned several OCM challenges in the previous sessions, but I think one of the best ones to coin is if you fail to plan, then plan to fail. So, making sure that we have a good plan, we understand where we're at, we use a baseline metric to measure the improvements is very, very important, as well as executive and digital transformation misalignment. That's another one. As we mentioned in the other sessions, if the business needs and the leadership needs, if they're misaligned and they're not understood, we're going to waste a lot of time in having to go back. So misaligned leadership leads to a company's misalignment, which creates no clear direction, and that is not good, especially when you want to have the change go across the company. If the top leadership doesn't have alignment and we're not, on a consensus, then we need to go back to the drawing board. Failing to pinpoint resistance to change is huge. As we mentioned in previous sessions, there is an obvious resistance and then there is an unintentional resistance. So being able to touch all the stakeholders necessary to identify those cues and making sure that we get a good understanding of what that resistance looks like, we'll be able to put plans in place to address it. I think we've mentioned this several times, Julia. Comms is not change management. Again, it's not, working with the communication team, although they are great partners. But we really need to have thought and intention on what we're trying to communicate by level, by department, by responsibility, to make sure everyone is understanding what it is, how it's going to impact them, and what they need to do. And the what's in it for me is very, very important. I honestly don't believe anyone comes to work wanting to do a bad job. And that really comes through communicating with the teams and being able to be honest and open with what we're doing and to show them the benefit. You can go to the next slide. Oh, do you have any questions or comments? Okay. Can you go to the next slide, please, Julia?
I think we have a question while we go to the next slide from Liam. Liam, you're on fire with all these questions, I gotta say. Gotta recognize that. Does diversity in the workplace have any bearing on acceptance or resistance to organizational change management?
Well, I think that's worth a discussion to make sure that everyone is included in the changes that impact them. And if there is a diversity issue, then it needs to be addressed head on, absolutely. So I don't really think it's a barrier. I think it's an opportunity to bring more people into the discussion and to get the perspective from where they are and what they're doing to make the process changes and the shift palatable for everyone. I don't think it's an issue. I think it's definitely something we can benefit from.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute and I was chatting away while Teresa was saying go to the next slide, and I didn't realise that I was on mute. Yes, just to echo what Teresa has said, diversity and inclusion is a massive thing, and I think that where I've worked before, and where I work now also, is that I will work with the diversity and inclusion team to make sure that we reach all areas of the organisation, to make sure that everybody is included in that. Because and I think we'll talk about this later, but a change agent network is a really good tool of being able to target those hard to reach places in the organisation and to make sure that everybody has a voice. Want me to go to the next slide, Teresa?
Yes, please.
Sorry.
No worries, no worries. So the guiding principles for successful change from third stage consulting, I do believe that we did go over this earlier. I don't want to spend too much time on this due to the time constraint we have, but I think one of the most important is that we involve the appropriate individuals when we're looking at this change. It's very, very important to make sure that the individuals that are involved in who's touching this process is available for the discussion. Again, if you don't do this from a process improvement standpoint and you're doing the work streams and you're trying to understand current state, you skip that, you go to the next stage, which is change management, we could miss something or someone's department. So it's always good to make sure that we have the right people at the table, as well as driving the change from the top down. Sponsorship is very, very, very important. Sponsorship, in my opinion, can either make or break a change management initiative. Having a clear vision, making sure we have our sponsors who support it, who are visible, who are there, and actively show their participation is huge. You can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I just want to add on a bit as well about sponsorship, and I think that what can happen is that there is a misunderstanding about what's meant by sponsorship. The role of for me, I guess for everybody, the role of the sponsor is absolutely pivotal, and more often than not, I have found that the sponsor doesn't really realise the responsibilities placed on them, and I think that sometimes they may think that, well, it's just doing some town halls and being the figurehead of it, and actually it's not. It's driving the strategic direction of the change, and also. Yeah, sorry, Teresa, and unblocking things that can't be unblocked anywhere else. So there's it's a massive undertaking.
Agreed. And through the tools that we use to help develop the sponsors, making sure that they're prepared, making sure the vision is clear, having that sponsorship roadmap is huge to help support them.
Yeah, and again, also just to add on, and we've peppered tonight's discussion with this, I know we say on one hand it's not just about communications, but without communication, organizational change is nothing. You need to tell people what's happening, but not just with one-way communication. Two-way communication and feedback is a really, really key thing. You need to hear from the organization. You need to understand what they're saying, what they're thinking, where the resistance is. I think when I did my change management practitioner, one of the things that was said to me was, you can't communicate too much. And I don't always agree that that's the case, because I think people can get communication fatigue and they switch off and they become disengaged. But certainly plentiful communication that's targeted and is diverse then is a really good tool to get people engaged and get people on board and make people feel that they're part of it. Because we do change with people, not to them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fab. Do you want me to move to the next slide, Teresa?
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah.
All right. So next slide, please. We're going to outline the change management approach, organizational change management approach. Phase 1 is the OCM discovery. Phase 2 is planning and strategy. Phase 3, mobilize the change. Phase 4, execute the transformation. And phase 5, vendor selection, if applicable. So as we go through this presentation, you will see how through discovery, it builds with planning. The planning and strategy builds with mobilization. Mobilization builds on execution. So again, the tools that we're using are fluid, and we're picking the right tool for the right circumstance. However, there are key tools that we're going to hit on, and I'm going to then hand it over to you, Julia.
Yeah, sure. Great. Let me just move to the next slide. So there we go. So, this is a methodology. This is our methodology in third stage. And with business change and organizational change management, like project management, there are different methodologies around. That there are we have Prince 2, we have ProSci, there are different methodologies. We have this one, and that's, and this is kind of like, it's more of a toolkit, I guess. And I think we said in the Q&A session that, the best change managers are flexible and they cut their cloth to suit. So, you know, it's all about what your client needs. It's not about enforcing prescriptive documents on them. I mean, the best change management is when you can identify what's needed. You can change the documentation to suit your client, to suit what's needed. You know, I've done impact assessments before and I've changed them every single time to different parameters, just depending on what the ask is, where they are in their change journey, what the organisation looks like, what their maturity is towards change. Because another challenge that comes up quite a lot is that we understand organisational change. Some people in the client organisation understand organisational change, but not everyone does. So sometimes you'll get people who work with you that are very systems orientated, who just don't live in they live in system world and they don't live in the people world. So it's about trying to cut that cloth to suit and trying to find the right solution with the right tools to get what you need out of it. So I hope that makes sense. So to point one about the discovery toolkit. So we talked earlier about vision. And we talked about the key to change when we had the Q&A session with Nate earlier was that we need to know what you want to be when you grow up. So what do you want, you know, where are you going? What are you trying to do? And that's great because, you know, you need a roadmap, you need a direction, you need a signpost. Brilliant, that's great. But the other thing that, you know, is a really, you need to build it on solid foundations. And that's the discovery phase. So you can see there that there are a whole host of things that you can use, a whole host of tools that you can use. And again, I'm going to emphasize the word toolkit because, you know, you don't have to do every single one of them. You pick the ones that you want to do. And what we want to do now is, I don't want to take you through every single one, but let's have a look at a few of them and understand how we use them, what the benefits are, just to give you a flavour of the things that we do in this stage. So first of all, organisation taxonomy. I'm working with a client just now. I'm trying to, well, I've got that information from them now. Sometimes it's not that easy to get. You know, not all organisations have a nice, lovely, pretty organisational diagram that shows everybody in every department. Some organisations grow organically. So trying to get that sometimes can be a bit of a job in themselves. But what the benefit of this is that it outlines who's in the organisation and who might be impacted by change and what the touch points are with customers or with suppliers or with clients, or where do you need to be focusing effort. So trying to get that is a bit of a challenge, but once you've got that, it helps you get that landscape of the organisation and understand what you're dealing with. And it's good, you know, if you can do that, that's a tool that can be used by other elements of the project as well. SIs are interested in that. It helps understand the number of licenses that you need to have. So it's a really good grounding first thing to do.
I actually think that this is a very important first step as well. If as a leader, you look at this and you say, wow, I didn't realize X, Y, and Z, it really opens them up to the change, the idea of change, saying, okay, we really need to do this. We need to make these initiatives happen, and I didn't realize X, Y, and Z. So having this snapshot in front of a leader is very, very powerful.
Sure.
Very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it helps, I mean, it helps define the enormity and the scale of the change. Because quite often when you're at C level, you're at board level, you don't see and you don't appreciate how many people are at the coalface. And I think it gives them a real good appreciation, as Teresa says, about who we're included in this and why we're throwing money at it. Because then it makes them think, well, actually, yeah, okay, I get it now. So, you know, it just helps them see what's going on.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Sure. Okay, great. Stakeholder mapping. Brilliant. Right. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. So stakeholder mapping is the next stage to the taxonomy. So you have a taxonomy, it's everybody in the organisation, but some people in that organisation might not care, they might not be impacted by the change. You don't want to, you certainly don't want to be throwing out a one-size-fits-all communications to lots of people who go, do you know what, I work in facilities, what's an ERP got to do with me? So it's about understanding who has skin in the game. And not just that, but understanding the impact that they have of that, the impact it has on them and their level of influence. because you want to know upfront who has influence, who can derail it, who is important to target, and who's important and how do they feel about it as well. You know, if you have someone now who's going, no, I don't want to do that, I want to have, you know, I just don't want to do it. It's a good point that you can identify that and you can put into action a plan to engage with them and manage them accordingly. And I'm not saying that, you know, it's a panacea, it's not going to solve all your problems, but it helps again set out that landscape of who you need to talk to, who's involved, and how they feel about things. So on that point, there's a number of different things that you can do. You can see here that the first thing is that you name your stakeholders, you work out where in the organisation they come from, and there's a couple of things that you can do. You can use power or influence, interest. You can change these variables on depending on your client, depending on what kind of change it is. It doesn't have to be power and interest. I've just done one that's influence and impact. So you know, it's about you know, varying it just depending on what you need. You can use whatever skills that you want. That's fine. And then it's a really impactful thing to do is to plonk everybody onto a matrix so that your senior management can see, actually, yeah, okay, this is why we need to devote money to communications. We need to maybe get another internal communications person, or we need to make sure that we've got enough resource to do that. So it gives them that opportunity to understand, again, the enormity and the benefits of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I also want to interject really quick. I think this is a good tool to show who you should put as these change agents or these major change stakeholders. Because if you have someone who has low influence or a low interest score and you assign them to be a change agent in a particular area, well, I mean, we can work with them, see how it goes. But if time is of the essence, you might want senior leadership to reevaluate what that person, who that role should really go to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So again, that's just a finished example, a worked example of a stakeholder map. This is something that I would generally use as a tool to inform senior management and sponsor level of, you know, where people are sitting here. And don't forget that, you know, and I think people may also misunderstand this in organizations from time to time, that it's a living, breathing document. Yes, it's absolutely a snapshot of where we are at this moment in time, but stakeholders change, roles change, people's opinions change, you know, people's resistance changes. So the absolute key thing to do is use this document throughout the life cycle of the change and beyond, and map the engagement. And you can do things on it, like, you know, you can have target levels of where you want people to be. You can measure how far they are off target. And again, you know, we don't do change in a darkened room. So this is very much about getting your senior stakeholders in place and having meetings with them, getting their input about how they feel about other people in the organisation. And sometimes, yes, sometimes some of that information this document can be quite sensitive. You know, people might not feel, you know, comfortable sharing it. So it's something that I would always password protect and keep quite closely under lock and key. You know, it can be quite inflammatory if somebody was to open it potentially. So yeah, it's a living document, and it's about development and managing those stakeholders. Okay, well, time is 4:40. So again, other things that you can do, leadership workshops. I think we mentioned this earlier on, that you know, we need to make sure that our senior leaders are aligned. You know, if one person thinks one thing and one person thinks another thing, and they're telling their team something different, you know, you can see where that's going to run into problems. So having those workshops with senior leaders, really valuable to understand how they feel about it, and moreover, what we're going to do about it. Business impact assessments, really great tool there. Again, this is about using the change. Sometimes that's requirements, sometimes that's a process taxonomy, but understanding what the impact is on teams. And if we talked about this earlier, we talked about automation. Just because a process is being automated doesn't mean that it is going to be plain sailing and everyone's going to be happy about it. That itself brings a lot of resistance. So it's about trying to understand how the change is going to impact people in terms of technology, their roles. Are they going to have to change location because of it? All of that things. Yeah. And then,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Teresa. No, go for it.
I was going to say that this is probably a good time to look at the business process activities that have happened, hopefully before that, just to kind of bump them up against each other to make sure that nothing was missed, to understand was there a stakeholder miss, et cetera, et cetera. How is this really impacting? So I think that this point it's a good exercise to kind of compare the two.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I just want to reiterate the point that, we don't do this in a darkened room. This is about reaching out to stakeholders, reaching out to SMEs in the organisation, reaching out to people that are at the coalface to ask them what their views are of it. We don't know, we know change, we're change experts, but we don't know the organisation. So it's about getting that information from them. And we talked very much about business analysis. This is absolutely business analysis and understanding how the business is. Yeah, and it's about the nosier you can be, in my opinion, and the more questions you can ask, the more valuable this tool is going to be. Great. And then I don't want to, it's 4:40, it's 4:42, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but all of that leads out to a change approach and plan. Where you want to have a strategy, you have to have an approach. We talked about the vision. We said, you know where you need to go. This is about how you get there, and what key activities are going to be in there, what milestones there are. And a good plan has things like ownership, who owns the change, how do we assess progress, how does it align to roles and responsibilities, how does it fit into benefits. And again, this is something that's sellable to your senior level, that says, actually, yes, OCM is a valuable thing. Yeah. And again, readiness assessment, good tool, really great tool for looking to see now, as a snapshot at the beginning of a change or at any point during a change, how ready the business is to accept change. And that includes parameters like, what else is going on in the business at this time? Are people change fatigued? Are we asking them to do too much? What's going on in the past? How do people feel about things? What else is happening? COVID is going on. People are in a state of flux. So, all of that falls into business readiness. Yeah, right. Sorry, Teresa, you're on. I talked a while. I'm so sorry.
You're fine. I would even suggest that we possibly have another one to go a little bit deeper and have the audience ask questions. This is such an important thing, and I know we're in time constraints, so we're going to get through this and have it available for the audience.
Absolutely.
So planning and strategy, making sure that we do touch upon the plans for the communication, the leadership action plan, the leadership engagement, and again, the change agents. Have a plan to identify who those influencers are. Do we have the right people? And then making sure that when we have all the pieces in place, we launch the brand accordingly. Next.
Cool. Yeah, perfect.
Sure. So touching on brand launch again, making sure this is a great time to have the buy-in that we need. So having people shake their head, yes, I get it, I'm going to do it, versus actually doing it is two completely different things. So when your stakeholder team or your sponsor, when they have the idea and they understand where we're going, what the initiative is about, and then bring change management into it, their buy-in is imperative, as well as developing a communication launch for our OCM initiative. Again, we touched on this before. What's the strategy? Why have we chosen this direction? And what's the benefit of the change? Again, the way the world is moving so quickly, change is inevitable. So really hitting on those benefits and how it's going to positively impact the daily lives and the daily jobs of the people that we're targeting is very, very important. As well as it's the what's in it for me. I think that is one of the keys. Again, understanding that people want to see how this is going to impact them. So developing that communication plan around that is imperative. Next, please.
Right, let me just get my mouse to the right place.
No worries.
Sorry, it was misbehaving. Right.
We're
Change agents.
We're change management professionals. We can roll with it. It's fine. So change agents, this is, again, a very, very important point. And I think we touched on it in the other sessions, that making sure that the right people are in the right locations for the right initiatives. I read a book called From Good to Great, and it's amazing. I would definitely recommend it because you have to make sure that the individuals who are promoting the change and pushing the change really believe it. Do they own it? Are they accountable for it? Do they add positive interactions to it? Because if not, then a lot of the work that you're going to do, you're going to have to redo. So identifying the influencers of the group, making sure that they're clearly educated on what we're doing, why we're doing it, get their input so we can develop a plan for them to move the change forward. Next. Communication plan, and I think we've all mentioned this before, it's not just an update as to where we are. The communication plan needs to be tailored by level, by department, by impacted group, so we can speak to them on how this change is going to impact their daily jobs. And I mentioned it earlier as well, having that message mapping session, making sure that we target those 3 levers. So is it logical? Are we creating some type of emotional connection? Is the person delivering the change a credible source or respected source? Those 3 elements together really help the acceptance of the information to the person that we need to receive it. So putting that communication together with the comms team, or if there is no comms team at the location, then just putting it together with stakeholders is very important. So next, please. Leadership engagement. I'm pretty sure we could talk about this all day, but again, leadership support is imperative. This will make or break the project. And it's just not support. It is understanding of what's going on. It is making sure that they are prepared to communicate the change and why we're doing it and the initiative as well. So leading all this together will help us to execute the plan. And we are able to develop the communication strategy, the cadence, and how we're going to deliver. There's multiple avenues of media that we could take to help embrace the change. Next, please. Okay, so time constraint consideration. There's a leadership action plan that we work to develop with the sponsor to make sure that, as I just mentioned, all of those elements are included in the plan. One of the things I want to call out is the risk assessment, which is huge. And again, this is a living, breathing document. So as we move through the change, these assessments will continue to make sure that we're able to hit the mark that we're looking to do. Next, please. All right, mobilizing change. Vision. We spoke on this a lot as well. Having a clear and concise vision to communicate across the organization is imperative. Making sure that we work with the leadership team on creating it for the future state. Where are we? Where do we want to go? Is where this vision is created. And be collaborative to make sure that all of the stakeholder groups or all of the people involved in these major change decisions are at the table to discuss it. So having the business goals and making sure that we align them to the organization's goals is very, very important. as well as to identify the business challenges and risks. The more risk assessment that we have available to us will help us develop a better change plan. And communicate, 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 as I've been saying all along. Next, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but I just wanted to add there. Yeah, pro tip we've put in the corner
Oh, yeah.
is about
Yeah.
it's about appealing to hearts and minds.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and that takes. Sorry,
Oh.
Teresa, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, when you do your message mapping and you use those 3 components, having that connection to an emotion is huge. So you have to make sure that the message it's coming from a logical perspective. You have to make sure that is an emotion tied to it, is if it's, whatever emotion you want, and making sure it's coming from a credible source or a respected source will really push that message forward. So yes, appealing to the hearts and minds, as well as making sure that that message is coming from that credible source with logic behind it, really opens the door to receiving the message.
Absolutely. Yeah. And appealing to hearts and minds just takes people beyond, just beyond accepting it, because they start to internalize it and believe in it. So, you don't just get people just to go, yeah, that's fine. Yes. You want people to believe and evangelize it.
Yep, absolutely. Because if they're open to receiving the message, they can embrace it, they can own it, and then eventually they're accountable for it, which is more, as you put, skin in the game.
Yep.
Benefit.
Sorry.
That's okay. Benefit realization is one of my hot topics, something that I really push to make sure that's clearly developed in the projects that we're on, because at the end of the day, people are providing we're providing the service to somebody and they want to see, what am I getting out of the change that was made? So developing, identifying those key KPIs, sometimes they're shared, sometimes they're, you don't want to. Like an attrition, we just talked about this earlier, an attrition metric. That's not something you want to share with the entire population of your organization. However, key leaders need to understand what's going on with attrition and how the change management can help with that. Benefit realization analysis is so, so, so important. I can't stress this enough, because again, at the end of the day, what's the bang for the buck, right?
For sure. Next one. Is this one me?
I think so.
Take it. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to do this in 2 minutes so that we've got time for questions. Okay. So this has all been, so we have a methodology. It's a logical methodology. You understand where you are, you mobilize your troops, you plan, you have your vision, and then you start to get ready, and then you go live. Yeah. So these are all types of things that you might do then. It's all the practical things that you want to do about compensation programs, weekly meetings, and we've written down there again, 2-way comms is absolutely invaluable. And when we've talked about this, for nearly an hour, change is hard. I know it sounds from this that you think it's all plain sailing. Actually, it's really hard. It's like, it's kind of like you find it's like 2 steps forward and 1 step back all the time. And someone mentioned there and saying that change is iterative. I can't say it, iterative. It absolutely is. What I've said is it's enough design up front. If you do big design up front and you plan everything out for the next 3 years, then it's not going to work. Right. So what the best thing to do is plan for the next quarter, review after the quarter, what went well, what didn't go well, what could we do differently the next time, and take it from there. And again, be flexible, cut your cloth to suit, listen to the people, listen to what they say. And then I've written another pro tip: honor the past.
Absolutely.
Be honest about things that have gone before, because people can see through nonsense. They're not stupid, and you absolutely have to give them that sense of trust.
So there is one thing I do want to say here, and this is great information. I'm a change management person, but anyways, I think that we hopefully can do this again in the future, because there's so much behind the tools and how to use them, and what's the outcome and what's the deliverable, that I don't think we were able to really let the audience see what this looks like in terms of practical application. A lot of times people think, okay, change management, and it's not really intuitive as to what goes into it. So I'm hoping there's definitely a need or a desire to learn more.
Yeah, we could talk about this all day. So I'm going to miss out that, and I'm going to just because I want to have time to ask questions. I hope this translates, because I call it a takeaway, but I think maybe people that are not in the UK call it a takeout. But I wanted to try and be funny, so it's a change manager joke. But my joke is the takeaway. It's not a joke. The takeaway point is it's not about changing technology. It's about successfully changing people's ways of working, and success depends on changing them successfully. So that's the whole crux of OCM. So I hope that makes sense. And then it's over to you. And if you're still hungry for more, that's my joke again about takeouts, then here are emails, and you're absolutely more than welcome to contact any of us.
I love your jokes. That was great.
Thanks very much.
Wow, that was action-packed. Thank you guys so much for diving through, everything you just talked about. I think we have a lot of questions that we didn't get to that I'd love to pick your brain on. So we'll spend the next 5 minutes or so running through those. And one of the questions that stood out to me is we talked a lot about resistance to change and how employees are going to be hesitant to change, whether it's intentional or unintentional. At what point should you seriously consider firing a change-resistant employee?
Oh. Well, I think that I'm going to take this one really quick. I don't think that anyone intentionally, I would like to believe that anyone would intentionally not want to do X, Y, and Z. I think the real issue is the root cause of the resistance and trying to understand what that really is. I'm not, rosy sunshine all the time, maybe 99.9%, but there is that 0.% that I'm like practical. Yes, we have to make a decision here. And that's really up to senior leadership to make that decision, giving them all the information, giving them all the facts, and having them make that call. So.
Yeah. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute.
My mic was not on mute, but
how many times can we say that from 2020 to 21? You're on mute.
You need a signal.
Such a buzzword.
I was gonna ask Julia, Nate, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Does it get to a point where you need to just cut the cord with someone who's not adapting well?
But I think it's like any job performance, and I think really changes this, and this is way over cliche used phrase, but change is happening all the time. I mean, you literally, whether you're working on a project or not, and whether you're working on a technology implementation, a change management initiative, your organization should always be going through change. And if someone's not willing to change, and if they're not willing to grow and change with the organization, then they're that's part of your job performance. So I think the one thing that you do owe employees, because I think we all have a resistance to change, like I mentioned earlier, I think you do owe them you do have an obligation to let them know how they fit into the change, how the change will help them, how it helps the organization, and what the vision is. And then, at the end of the day, just the same as any other part of your job performance, if you're not willing to change, and if you're not willing to do the work to make yourself different and better for the organization, then you really don't need to be there.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's the truth. And I mean, you mentioned that a lot of it comes from fear. So I guess, how do you work with the people who are just genuinely hesitant because they're afraid they're going to lose their job? If you bring on this new technology, for example, what do you say to them? What are some, quick tips that you would give somebody who has someone on their team that's not adapting well?
I think, first of all, I think that change agent network is instrumental in talking to those people, because people who are scared respond better to peer rather than some faceless person that's in the change department or a consultant. And I think it's much easier, firstly, for them to open up and talk about that. And having that change agent network allows the change agent to have the tools to go back and talk to them about it. So I think that's step one. But we mentioned this a couple of times. I think that, part of it is about being honest. and part of them, but not being brutally honest, sometimes you have to put a bit of spin on things. But you know, sometimes automation of stuff doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to lose their jobs. And I think that's a key message that needs to be played back. That, you know, it leaves room for people to do more valuable jobs. So I think that it can be an opportunity for people as well. So those are the kind of approaches that I would take.
That's great feedback. I've even been on that end of it where, you know, I was married to my spreadsheet that I made in my last job. And when we brought on a new software, it was, you know, comfort zones. They're easy to stay in, right? So when you have people that you like, trust, and respect on your team that are more cognizant and welcoming to the change, it kind of changes your mind as well. It's interesting how it.
Absolutely.
And
sure.
One last thing I'll say to that too is I think here's another overused cliche, but I think change is 180, and you really need to make sure that employees are given their job and they're given a reason why they're changing, and they also need to see you changing as well. And I think, you know, I kind of use the analogy, if your parents come in when you were a little kid and they say, okay, the family's not eating any more sugar, we're all going to eat healthy food, and we're all going to exercise all the time. And then you look at your parents and they're sitting on the couch chugging Coke and eating potato chips. What does that say as far as you? You know, you're going to say, well, it's obviously not important to them. They obviously don't believe in the change. So why should I believe in the change? And I think, again, you know, I referenced our client earlier this week. They all were very clear about the vision. They saw what it was going to do. They saw it was going to help them all. But they said, you know, how do we convey this to our workforce? And so I think that it's really kind of a two-part thing, is you really have to live it yourself, and then you also have to make sure that they know what that vision is and what it looks like.
That's right. Lead by example.
Yeah.
Let's see. I have time for maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. So in the chat, I see a question, another one from Liam. Do you see many organizations fail to stay the course and see OCM through until the end? And what caused them to swerve onto the off-ramp, if you will, on the OCM motorway? You're on mute, Teresa.
A little smile goes a long way, right? Okay, so I was saying I will take that one to start off with. Yes, I have seen initiatives start strong and kind of taper off. And earlier in my career, gung-ho, let's get this done. I think I took too much on. I think I owned it too much versus having the client really embrace it and just own that piece of the change and what we were trying to get done. And then when I walked away, it went, kind of derailed. So that I learned very early on in my career, having the sponsor active, visible, active, engaging, having the right stakeholders, having the right change agents, and making sure that they're the ones that really push it, move it, believe it, breathe it. I got it. That's how change is lasting and impactful. But if a consultant comes in and they try to own everything, what happens when they leave?
Yeah.
They own nothing. So,
yeah, I think separate point on this, but I think what happens when a reason people get derailed or changes get derailed is there's a change in sponsorship at the top where person B starts and then says, nope, stop, I want to just change it. And then all that good work has potentially been undone. So there's a key stakeholder management piece there to say to them, well, actually, do you know what? We've invested all this time, all this money, all this effort in getting people to point B. Are you sure that you want to try and undo that? And honestly, that's a really hard conversation to have. But I think, again, it's a necessary conversation to have.
Yeah. I also have another one, actually, change saturation. So you have too much going on, and you do this project, it was awesome. And then you kind of get the leadership, to your point, telling everyone to switch gears. So if again, leadership is an understanding and they're not bracing and they're not putting that thoughtful intent behind how each of these changes even intersect or how the resources are distributed, it could happen.
Interesting. Good answers. Okay, last question. Let's see. How would you manage? So we've talked a lot about kind of managing up if you need to and selling the importance of OCM to executive leadership that might not fully grasp it yet. How would you manage a lack of executive support and active sponsorship with OCM?
Who wants to go?
So, I mean, I'll go back to the example that I had. Being honest and upfront. So when I get pushback on initiatives or programs or what have you, we want it done, because I don't really have time for this. I don't have time for this. So the question is, okay, I hear what you're saying. Do you want it done right now, or do you want it done the right way? And then when you put dollars behind those statements, bing, their eyes are open. They're like, okay, let me hear what you, because people don't want to lose money, especially when they're accountable to a board or whomever. Really being able to speak to that has, in my experience, helped tremendously. And honestly, if there are, leaders that don't want to participate or embrace it, that is definitely a conversation that you need to have with that executive sponsor. Is this person the right person to lead the charge? And if they're SVP or what have you, that's fine. Your titles are awesome. Thank you. But at the end of the day, we have to get this done for the organization. You laugh, Julia.
Only because it's true. Only because I know.
True.
I'm a truthful kind of lady.
I love it. I mean, another thing too, I don't know, I'm thinking of how you could sell it and manage up is take case studies. I mean, there's so many case studies out there of ERP failures where a lot of it is due to a lack of OCM. So, if there's anything that speaks ROI and the effect that it can have on a project, it's, let's learn from other people's mistakes and not do the same thing.
Absolutely.
And their resistance to change is just the same as everyone else's. And if they're overwhelmed with work, then we need to address that. If they don't see the value in it, if they don't see the alignment in what we're doing, then we need to address it. And somebody made a decision to pay you a lot of money, and somebody's making a decision to try and get the best bang they can for their technology buck. So whoever's ultimately making that decision needs to know that the chances for success are going way down when you don't have leadership involved.
So one other point just for Julia on the last slide she had, I think it was a couple last slides, but be honest about the past, honor the past. So you can always bring that up and like, okay, you had this failure, this didn't work, how much did it cost you? If you tie the dollars back, I'm telling you it works. How much did it cost you? So
absolutely.
Great feedback. Money talks, right?
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Money talks. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. It is always such a pleasure to have experts on this panel, experts sharing their insights, and you guys are truly good at what you do. So we appreciate your time today. Thank you for walking us through all of these concepts. And Teresa, like you said, I mean, there's so much left to unpack that we can unpack. So maybe you just have to join us on the podcast and, we'll get you back on stage to keep sharing your thoughts. We would love that.
as long as my friend Julia can come with me.
Yeah,
we can talk about it all day.
All of you. You guys are amazing. So thank you.
Okay.
And I also, you guys just saw, I put in the chat here on Crowdcast, and we'll put it in the comments if you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube as well. But it's just a handful of links from our website to our contact information for the marketing team. I put a link for our YouTube channel, our podcast, and our Third Stage LinkedIn page if you're not already connected. I encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. That's where you're going to see all of our content be pushed out, from blogs to new podcast episodes to new videos. So we encourage you to tune in there. And of course, stay up to date on the new events that are coming up. Like I said, every month we host a workshop just like this. So we will be having another one in June. And you can find more information on that on our website, which is thirdstage-consulting.com. And in addition to that, like I said, the 2021 Digital Transformation Report, the button is at the bottom of the page, and we are copying the link in the comment section if you're not on Crowdcast. So make sure to download it, just because it's a good resource for you to have. It's a good resource for you to share with your team. And it really covers the full scope of what makes a digital transformation successful in 2021 and beyond. So with that said, we really appreciate you guys joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure guiding you through this workshop. Lots of amazing insights from our speakers, lots of amazing questions, comments. You can tell that the people that tuned in today also are in the industry, know what they're talking about, and are sharing their knowledge with us as well. So we appreciate you joining, being a part of it, and we hope to see you at next month's Full Throttle. We appreciate it. Have a good one.
Bye.